Hey everyone, this is Alan McKay. Welcome to episode 28. I'm here with Christopher Nichols from Chaos Group, the developers of V-Ray and other awesome stuff. Let's get in there.
Welcome to the Alan McKay Podcast. Alan is an Emmy Award-winning visual effects artist and mentor to many leading industry experts. Listen in as Alan talks with other industry leaders in film, video games, and visual effects about their experience, lessons, and methodology. Alan will teach you pivotal advice to fast-track your career, better your skills, and reach your ultimate dream job. Check out the latest episodes on alanmckay.com.
All right, awesome. So I just got back from Paris. I was over there speaking at the It's Art Masterclass alongside, so many talented artists. Mark Simonetti, who has done a lot of really amazing artwork, cover art for all the Game of Thrones books and lots of really cool stuff. Really amazing artist. He's got a lot of his own books of his artwork out there as well. Really cool to see him doing speed painting and talking about composition. Andrew Schmidt, who has been working at Pixar forever. I think Monsters, Inc. was his first project, and since then he's worked on everything from Ratatouille, Up, Brave, and everything else. Really, really cool people. Lots of interesting speakers, lots of interesting attendees. I had such a cool time getting to meet and talk with everyone over there. I don't know, it was a blast. Like, so many talented artists. I got to look at a lot of people's artwork, reels, everything else. Got to do all the autographs and photos of everyone, which was really cool. Must have been at least a few hundred people that I got to talk to out of the several hundred attendees. So, I don't know, it was such a cool time. Coolest thing was I have my mentorship that I started in January, and a lot of the guys flew in from all over Europe. So I got to talk with a lot of the people that I've been mentoring and getting to spend a lot of my year with so far in person, which was super cool to drink and hang out as well as everyone else. I mean, I met so many cool people and got to just spend a few days just having a blast and speaking about some really cool subjects. So that was awesome, and I just got back yesterday. So obviously this episode is a little bit delayed, just catching up on everything. It's been pretty crazy the last couple of days, but finally up to speed and lots to do. I've got a really cool episode coming up next, episode 29. I won't mention what it is. I'll leave it to be a bit of a surprise. But this episode is going to be about Christopher Nichols, who has worked for Digital Domain, dozen other really high-profile studios, as well as being such a high-profile artist himself, having worked on a lot of really awesome projects, as well as working for Chaos Group, which is, as I'm sure you're all aware, the developers of the industry standard renderer, V-Ray. Okay, so V-Ray has worked in architecture. It's been the standard for most game cinematics, for a lot of feature film, a lot of everything pretty much. Really, really cool stuff, because not only has Chris got such a wide, vast background, but also being tied in with Chaos Group, he has so many amazing stories to discuss on this. He also has his own podcast, which you guys should definitely check out as well. So I'll leave all the information in the show notes for this. If you want to check him out now, go to www.alanmckay.com/28 or 28 for episode 28. Okay. That's it. I will leave this short. I will have a bit more info at the very end of this, but besides that, as I've said before, please leave some comments. I'd love to hear from you. I've been bombarded with email. In fact, Facebook requests, email, notes, everything. I'm going to be spending Friday pretty much just catching up on all that stuff, but lots of really cool stuff. So thanks again, everyone, for contacting me, and please do leave a reply. I'm going to be replying to a lot over the weekend, so I'll make sure to catch up on yours as well. I'd love to hear your feedback. Let's get in there, guys. Hi, everyone. This is Alan McKay. I'm here with Christopher Nichols, who is a V-Ray lighting guru. I'm not sure how really to intro you because you've done so much, but you've worked for Digital Domain, you worked for Sway, you've worked for a lot of different places, SpeedShape, but more importantly, you work with Chaos Group as a creative director, I believe.
Yep.
And you're just an all-around badass when it comes to lighting and rendering and doing photoreal stuff. So that's awesome. But thanks for taking the time out to come out and do this episode.
Thank you.
Awesome, man. So I'm just gonna jump right in because I kind of love throwing people in the deep end just to start out. But like, what's a typical day for you? You work for Chaos Group, obviously. You have come from an artist background, but you work for them doing a lot of stuff for Chaos Group Labs. Is that right? So
yeah.
What's a typical day look like for you?
Well, that's the problem. There's nothing typical of it right now.
That's the whole point.
And which is actually kind of nice. I mean, I have basically moved away from the traditional shot production process. And what's interesting about it is that a lot of the things that I'm working on now are things that have come up on my own, things that I've decided, hey, let's do this, and then I'll throw it out there to the guys at Chaos Group, to Vlado and Lon and Peter, whoever I'm working with, and say, hey, we should do this. Do you guys think this is going to be an important part of what we need to do? And they just say, yeah, okay, great. So the problem is I've done that a few too many times, and now I'm basically in the point where I'm supporting a lot of the projects that I initiated, and I'm now kind of in the process of, oh crap, I got a lot of stuff I got to do, which has been great. But it's been really about me hanging out with the guys who I think are important and just figuring out what we want to do to get to the next point that we want to do and have fun with what we're doing. And Labs is basically about that.
That's really cool. That's super cool. And I was kind of curious about that because I actually checked out your IMDb today just to see, because I kind of figured you've transitioned over to Chaos Group. You're probably not in production anymore, but you've got 2 feature films you're already credited for 2015. So I mean,
yes.
It sounds like you're still pretty active.
Well, I'm sort of working in. I've been working in a bunch of stuff that I've been doing, and I haven't done anything in 2015. Are you sure?
Yep. Unless there's 5 other Christopher Nichols.
There is, actually. And that's actually an interesting point. There is another Chris Nichols at Digital Domain.
You're kidding?
Nope. I am not kidding. There's another Chris Nichols at Digital Domain, and I actually used to get his emails.
Wow, yeah.
So, no, don't worry about it. It's easily confused. I used to, people used to email me, like, hey, what are you doing for lunch? He's actually based in Vancouver. The last feature film that I worked on was Maleficent. Mm-hmm. So that was the last thing I did. But yeah, I've been active up until Maleficent at this point. Mm-hmm. So
I'm curious about this. I'm Googling this real quick.
Okay, no problem.
But no, that's awesome. So, I mean, going back to that for a minute though, you worked at Digital Domain for quite a while.
Yes.
And
several times, actually.
And apparently there's 2 of you, which is just even more fun. But
there's actually 2 of us. There was 2 of us, and yet another Chris Nichols that was at Sony ImageWorks as well.
I would love if I've just been doing background, on the wrong person the whole day. That'd be really, really cool. But yeah, you're right. So someone who's worked on Fast and Furious 7.
Yeah, that's the other
Chris
Chris
Nichols. He's a texture guy.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
So that's great. But you worked on Girl with the Dragon Tatoo, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yes.
See, this is what I was looking at. Okay, yeah. So 2014 was Maleficent. So when you were there, I mean, initially, I guess, was Day After Tomorrow your first project?
Day After Tomorrow was my first project. What basically happened is I used to work in architecture. I was an architect. I had an architecture degree.
Every goddamn lighting artist I know comes from architecture.
Yeah, it's a very easy transition.
Because you're like, okay, I want to go and light stuff. I want to do cool images. Now I actually want to earn real money, so I'm going to switch industries.
Well, it wasn't necessarily about earning money. To be honest, what it was to me was that when I was in architecture, I was working for a very big firm. But back in the day, think eons ago, there wasn't that many 3D guys. So I was good at 3D, and so they immediately pigeonholed me into that. You're the guy who can do 3D and visualization, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm like the ArcViz guy, which they had. But I was actually a good designer. And I was frustrated because I was like, oh, I want to do more, stuff where I'm actually designing buildings. And they're like, yeah, we know you're good because we've seen your stuff. But unfortunately, we can find designers. We can't find many 3D guys. So you're going to keep... you got pigeonholed. And they admitted that to me themselves, right? And I was like, oh, well, that sucks. And then, but Gensler is really nice. They're a really great firm. It's like, we're going to look for some opportunities for you to be able to get into the design process. So they put me on some design projects. First project they put me on, it's like, all right, we're going to have a design meeting. It's for an office building, blah, blah, blah. It's like, great. It's like, so we have to figure out, the fire ratings on the door and the handicap railing height. And it's like, oh no, this sucks. It's that's what design was at that specific project. There was no big thing, So it's like, I have to go through these steps. Same time, right then, there was a friend of mine who worked at the same company that I used to work at. So he had worked at Gensler, and he went into visual effects, and he called me. He's like, and his name is Eric Hansen. I don't know if you know Eric.
Oh
Hansen. Yeah.
Yep.
So Eric Hansen, he had worked at Gensler, and he said, "Hey, don't know if you're interested, but I'm about to work on a project called Day After Tomorrow. It's a Roland Emmerich movie, and if you ever had a feeling about leaving architecture, we have to build all of New York." And we need someone who knows how to build buildings. So that's basically how I got into it. I was like, all right, let's do it. Let's try it out.
That's cool.
And so that was my thing. And then what was interesting to me is that suddenly I went from the guy who was a 3D guy to being in a sea of 3D people. But suddenly they're looking at me as like, oh, you're an architect. We need to get all these other random buildings built. Can you design those for us? And so suddenly I was designing buildings.
That's great.
More than I thought. It's like, oh wait, I'm suddenly the guy who knows more about architecture than anyone else. So
really cool.
that was the interesting part of that first transition into that. Yeah.
What was it like working on that project?
It was kind of crazy. There was a lot of politics and crazy stuff.
Was it the flood sequence?
It was all of it. We did a flood sequence. I worked on. I did a bunch of modeling, but I was in that process as a modeler, and I did a lot of stuff in New York, and then I did the Liberty Island stuff. I modeled all that stuff, and a bunch of other little random stuff here and there. But they knew that I had a passion for lighting, and they were really trying to move me into the lighting process. And then things kind of went awry. I don't know if you know all the backstory of DD and
I know
the story.
I know way too much.
But let's just pretty much say that things that I was working on in terms of things got moved over to other shows, and there was a huge amount of politics about it. But it was fine because the best part of that process is that and DD was great about this. Is they basically said, hey, this guy really loves working on lighting, and he's got a passion for it, architecture background, et cetera, et cetera. So they put me onto iRobot, which was great, and I moved right into iRobot. And I don't know why they did this. I don't know why they had faith in me at the time, but it was my second feature film when they put me in a lighting lead role. So I was.
That's great.
Now, but. I'm going to say that basically, I had a bunch of experience before that because I had been working as a CG artist in architecture for 5 years, right? So I knew, and they already knew that. They saw, oh, well, this guy understands this, et cetera, et cetera. And the guy who mentored me and pushed for that and said, this guy knows that. Don't assume that he's only had one
Was
film
that Eric?
on. No, it wasn't Eric, actually. It was a guy named Andy, what was his last name?
Man, he mentored you and you can't remember his name.
Yeah.
What a
it was
jackass.
really cool. Yeah, I know. Sorry. But Melanie Yakamura, she was my modeling supervisor there. She also said, yeah, it was great. And basically, she introduced me to this guy named Paul George, who was the CG soup on iRobot, and said, take this guy. He's going to help, be one of your lighting supervisors. Because he had, I think, 3 lighting supervisors for different sequences. So I took 2 or 3 sequences each, and then we would have our little teams and we would work them out. And that's basically what I did. And it was a great project, actually. iRobot was probably one of my top projects I worked on.
Oh, yeah?
And you know how it is, right? It's not like what matters more is not necessarily the quality of the movie. It's how cool your team is and how great the product is and how proud you are. Even if the movie's not great, that's like, oh yeah, iRobot was a great project.
That's actually. I was going to ask you later. Is this not what your favorite project was, but actually what was the one that you meshed with your team the
Yeah.
best, because that really is what makes it.
That's what makes it, right? It's about the bonding you have with your team and how much fun you have on the project. Because iRobot was really, really stressful at the first, because we were really, and I wasn't using V-Ray at the time. I was using RenderMan, and RenderMan had no ray tracing, right? And so we had to basically create this method of creating all this translucency all through all these weird maps that we were developing out of RenderMan, and then composite all it. Nuke was actually more of the hero of that project than RenderMan, and it was creating all of these amazing maps. And we had this whole, we call it the MakeBot node, where you can go in and all these random layers would go in, and you could tweak exactly the way the translucency worked. Looked beautiful. It was such a great project, and we were but it took a while to get there. So the stress was like, it's not looking right, not looking right. I'm like, oh my God, it's looking better and better and better and better. And now, like, wow, we nailed it. And then we just creamed through all the shots, and it just became really easy.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Do you have like mTOR or Slim or anything like that to work with, like for like RenderMan's, like, because you got RenderMan as itself, but like there's I haven't used RenderMan forever, but like having Slim and mTOR, just they were essentially like the best kind of bridge for building, at least in Maya for.
Absolutely, yeah. We were using Slim for all of the shader building for sure, and then mTOR was basically what we were doing rendering in. But it would pretty much, we would just output it, and then it would all just go into a Nuke script, and then it would just build itself.
That's great.
And we actually used that same idea on my next show, which was going to be Stealth, which wasn't as fun. I'm going to tell you that right off the bat.
Which sequences were you on?
On Stealth? God, I don't even remember.
Because the whole time, like 2004, one of my friends, Barry, was DJing at the Tiki parties, so like I was pretty much there every weekend getting drunk. So 2004 is a very fond year for me.
Oh, at DD? Mm-hmm. So you were hanging out at the Martini Nights?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That was the only thing that made it better, to be honest, because it was such hard work. We were, I think, on the Stealth days, we were doing 12 to 14-hour days for like 7 days a week. It was pretty bad.
I popped up there at one point. One of my buddies.
Camel hump. I was on a camel hump sequence, which is the most idiotic sequence ever. I'm sorry.
What is that?
The camel hump sequence was the sequence where you had the blimp that was leaking fuel in a circle.
Right. Yeah. So using Voxel Bitch for all the.
Yep. And then Alan was a great guy, obviously. The guy who wrote Voxel Bitch, which is now called
Storm.
Thank you.
I love that because there's like I remember one of the guys, like Gordon Chapman, he was working on that show.
I know Gordon, yep.
Yeah, I've known that guy since I was 14. Like, we go way back. And, it was just funny because he was telling me how around the time you guys DD decided to switch it from Voxel B or Voxel Bitch to Storm because they wanted to make it commercial. And so I don't even know why they did this, though, but they went in and changed all the internal variables, like any reference inside of it, to say Storm instead of Voxel Bitch. And somewhere along the way they actually broke it because of that, and like it wasn't usable for a good week and a half because they changed it to Storm and like managed to break something internally.
Could be. I do remember when they decided, they put a press release that they were going to call it Storm, and then someone did a picture of
James
Alan.
Cameron?
No, Alan as Storm from X-Men.
Right. Gotcha.
So that was pretty fun.
Well, I always thought it was funny that Cameron, his company's Storm.
Right.
So, yeah, but
Well, it's funny also is that because it was an internal program, and because Alan was a DD guy and part of that whole old school DD mentality, he would put into the code things that would come up like they were very DD specific. So you start rendering and these messages would come up as like, remember, today is Wednesday and happy hour starts at 5 o'clock at the firehouse. And so these messages would come up as like, obviously this is a digital domain program, or whatever it was always something that would happen that would be really cool about it.
What's what I liked about Ion Software with Digital Fusion is that I guess like a lot of the programmers, I met a few of them there, half of them Australian and New Zealanders, so there's always like words that would come up that are all Kiwi, like New Zealand words that like nobody else would know what the hell they mean.
Yep.
So you know, you could have those references that no one else seems to get. You know, kind of adds to the fun.
I know.
But did you ever get to work with Karen Galikas when you were on?
Day After Tomorrow?
Yep.
Yep. I was there when her hair was lit on fire at one point. That was during
At
a
the
martini
party?
night.
Yep.
That was a martini night, yeah.
Was it the same day she burnt the script?
No, she didn't burn the script, actually. No, yeah, that's a different story. We shouldn't get into that one. But, yeah, she was very involved at DD at the time, and she was very passionate. The issue that I think that I had with Karen is that I didn't have an issue, but to be honest, because at the time I was just a modeler, so I was mostly just watching it from the sideline. But I think that was frustrating to most people was the fact that it was very hard to get a concrete decision about anything. And I remember specifically, like as an example, there was the hailstorm that happened in New York, in LA, right? And there was supposed to be these big golf ball sized hail balls that come down, and it's only like 3 shots.
Tokyo, I think it was.
No, Tokyo, right?
Yeah.
Tokyo, and I think there was in LA as well. But anyway, these big hails are flying down.
Yeah.
They modeled the hailstorms, several of them, and she insisted on turntables of the hailstones. Wow. And I believe they went through 45 versions of hailstone turntables before she would approve the hailstones, which is basically just a white blur that goes through the sky. There's no need for that. And I think that's what was frustrating to most people. Is like there's no need for that level of, you know.
Pierre Grage, who wrote Inside VFX, like he wrote a few, like that book that came out. He wrote a few case study stories which were really cool, and one was on Titanic, and there was a thing at DD where on Titanic that James Cameron was like flipping out about, you know, those aren't North Atlantic seabirds in the background, like they're little pixels. He's like, they're the wrong birds, like we got to redo them, or the propeller is like spinning the wrong way. You know, it's like really intricate stuff that at the end of the day you got to kind of worry about, like, you know, is it really going to make or break a shot, you know?
Well, there's a level of, you know, there's always a level of, I know it's wrong, so therefore it's going to bother me, and if it's easy to fix, let's fix it, right? And that's good. I don't think that's a wrong thing. And I think there's certain detail levels that are like, well, do we really need an 8K texture map or not? You know?
Yeah.
But sometimes you can subtly tell, and it makes a difference. I don't necessarily think you need 43 turntables of a hailstone. No. And when you're having migrating birds on Day After Tomorrow and they're way in the background, just silhouettes, you don't need to make 2K texture maps for their tongues. So,
Jesus. Wow.
So I'm just saying that out there. But so anyway, that's basically where I'm going. I think that there's a level of balance you need to figure out, but there is an old school mentality. Let's just go back to the Titanic days, right? That was a level of detail that you can go to, because suddenly on Titanic, as an example, that's when CG was kind of new, right? And there was no pixel too small, right? People would get into like that, and that's why it would cost $1 million a shot to do something. Yep. Now you don't do that anymore. It's like, no one's gonna know. Who cares? Let's move on. And people have learned from that. I think that the Day After Tomorrow exercise was a bridge between those things, and I think that's why we were getting into that scenario. And I think there's also a mentality back then, to be honest, that unless I get into that level of detail, I'm not going to get nominated for an Oscar, and that was the important part of that process. That I think that was important. Like, I need to be able to go, those birds are the most accurate birds possible, and everything was done.
We had to write custom software,
and we had to write custom software for all of this, and therefore that's what's going to get me nominated for an Oscar. That's not the case anymore.
No. Yeah. Well, it's such a BS thing. I mean, I always think that like a good artist is able to play producer and artist at the same time, because you need to be able to
manage your time.
Yeah, to make those calls about, okay, this is good enough for production. This is not good enough for me. And of course, like the VFX soup and everyone else is going to have their say, but like for yourself at least, be able to say, okay, like I've got to be real about my time. This is my other priorities I got to get done. So that way, at least, you can move on, and you can also communicate that to the other people who are oblivious to that.
Well, I was listening, to your podcast with Throb, right? And so when Throb was basically going out there,
Sitting right in your seat.
yeah, when Throb was basically
Still warm.
when he was basically saying like, I'm going to get my first version out there as fast as possible, so I'm not spinning my wheels on useless nodes that don't actually exist, then he's right. He's right about that. But the only way that's going to work is if you have a good relationship with your artist, or with your client, where he's going to trust you. He's like, I'm giving you crap just so that I can get a reaction, but don't worry, it's going to be okay. I just want to make sure I'm not going the wrong way. And the only way that's going to work is if you're like your artist or your director or whoever your client is trusts you.
Absolutely.
Right?
Because no, you're absolutely right. Because like there's two spectrums. I'll say the other spectrum first, which is the ones who know 3D or think they know 3D, so they try and act a lot more knowledgeable than they are, which drives me nuts too.
Yes.
I've had directors, actually one who's doing a really big movie right now, and he would call me up in the middle of the night because I'd be explaining to him how the 30-foot dust storm that changes into a creature, is doing insane stuff. It's going to take a few days to simulate, and we need like special computers to do it. I got Dave Finch's IT guy to build me a bunch of machines so I could get these shots done. And he would call me up and be like, "Oh yeah, I've been thinking about your situation with getting your stuff done. And what if you render in tens? Because the simulation I got to do, it's like, dude, this has nothing to do with rendering. But having
His solution was
he's trying to find solutions because he knows a little bit about 3D enough that it's like, hey, I know what Maya is. Let me try and tell you how to do your job. So that's the other side of the spectrum. But then you get the people who don't know 3D at all, and it's very easy to scare the shit out of them. And like I've had that too at the very beginning of my career. I did like a Fruit Loops commercial in Maya, and I did like a play blast, but I had the locators or whatever in there, and I sent it off to the clients like midnight. I'm going home. I sent it off to them. My producer like freaks out, and apparently it was Fruit Loops in Mexico. I was in Australia, so they have like different colors and everything. And
different colors in Australia.
Really? No. Apparently Fruit Loops Mexico is different to the US and Australian one. But
is it like Mexican Coke? I wonder.
who the
Because maybe it's made with real cane sugar as opposed to fructose corn syrup.
Who the fuck knows? But but yeah, like they freaked out. And, like I didn't get it. This is me at the beginning, like pretty early in my career, where I'm like, what the hell? Like they're locators. They're obviously not the geo. I'm like doing these big Fruit Loop things, but they're freaking out about the green little plus in the corner of the screen. But you gotta take that stuff in consideration. Like the client doesn't understand this. They're looking at the image as a whole, and they're going to say, why is it gray shaded, or why is this? And you're right. Like you need to have that communication, that trust.
And then at the same time, you have someone like Joe Kaczynski that I work with on Tron, and he'll basically look at me and he's like, wow, that looks really clean. What was your noise threshold in V-Ray? Like he actually knows what I'm talking about. Like I have no problem. So like you got to know your client, right? And like if you're dealing with Fincher as an example, right? One of the reasons that Eric Barba and Fincher work so closely together is because they speak that language. They understand that. Fincher used to work at ILM, right? So Fincher comes from the VFX background. He understands it, and he understands color like very, very specifically. And Eric Barba is just like right on the same wavelength as him. That's why they have a strong relationship. So it's good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I actually just turned down a project with Kaczynski, which I'm starting to regret because everyone I interview seems to be like
such a nice guy.
Yeah.
And he knows his shit. He knows what he wants. And he'll tell you very, very specifically.
Did you work with Rob at SpeedShape?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. So, yeah, Rob and I didn't work at SpeedShape for very long. But Rob and I have known each other for years, right? We've worked on Stealth together and a bunch of stuff at DD. And actually, Rob can testify to this, but I introduced him to V-Ray, to be honest.
I thought you were going to say you introduced him to L or something, and I'm like, oh, V-Ray.
No. I introduced him to V-Ray. So V-Ray was like the thing where at the time, and everyone was all RenderMan based stuff, and Rob was at DD, and I said, it was just still mind blowing to me at the time. That as an example, right? We're working on Day After Tomorrow, and they were trying to build a ambient occlusion pipeline for these buildings, and they were trying to bake out ambient occlusion in RenderMan, and it was just getting really, really complicated. And to me, I was looking around, like The Emperor Has No Clothes. Like, why is this taking so long? Why is it so complicated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Because in V-Ray, I just like put a dome light in there and you're done, right? I mean, that was like the simplest thing, and it was fast. And so I went to Rob and I was like, am I high, or is this like, does it really need to be this complicated and this long to bake out ambient occlusion? Or do you even need to do that? Because I'm used to just like not even dealing with ambient occlusion, just doing real GI. And he's like, yeah, you're probably right about that. And he was the only one that would listen to me, to be honest, at the time. And so when he started off on stealth and we started looking at planes, stealth was happening kind of at the same time that iRobot was. So he started in the very early days of stealth and was kind of working on things. And he was exploring ray tracing on stealth. And he was the one that basically I said, you got to check out things like Brazil and V-Ray, and he was a Lightwave guy also, so he knew about ray tracing. So he knew about ray tracing, and so that's the only reason why he and I like clicked about that. And I was like, scanline rendering and trying to shoehorn a ray tracer into a scanline renderer doesn't always work. Go with a pure ray tracing, and so he was the one that sort of pushed that idea. But I fed that to him. I was like, try this out. This is going to work, and he ran with it, and he was right. And we didn't necessarily use it on stealth, but it seeded the idea. And I think he was the first person that sort of got DD to start using V-Ray on the Nine Inch Nails project.
That's what I was about to ask, because Digital Domain commercials at least heavily used like V-Ray for the longest time. So,
and it started off with that Nine Inch Nails project, because I think after all of that stuff happened, he went to Eric Barba, and I think they were working on Fincher, Nine Inch Nails, etc. They've been good friends, and it's like, let's try it out. And they kind of went crazy on at that time. Think about it. Think about when that was made. I don't know the date, so you can probably put it in there, but they did full-on ray tracing, depth of field, everything.
I remember at the time.
It was SD, but still, it was. I can't believe they did all that.
It would have been either. I think it was 06 maybe. I don't know. I was in LA at the time when they did it. I can't remember that, but it was amazing because it was still one of those things that Max Max did that, and DD's using Max for that. That was like big news.
Oh, right, of course. And that was the thing. Well, Eric was one of those guys, like, I don't care, whatever makes it look good, right?
That's what it should be.
Yeah. Yep.
There's plenty of times I'll ditch Max for a different package and vice versa. So.
You know what was funny is that I remember very specifically a conversation I was having where I was talking about, to some of the big higher-ups in the technology side of things at DD, and I was saying, well, my confusion about, like, I don't understand why it's taking so long to do the ambient occlusion. It's like, why can't you just use another rendering? Like, why not use like something that can do the ambient occlusion way faster with ray tracing?
Right.
And they said, well, if you've never worked in feature films, Chris.
Oh, fuck you.
Yeah. And it's like, well, RenderMan is the tool to use in feature film commercials, and no one's ever been fired for using RenderMan. And the irony, of course, is that, you saw what happened on Day After Tomorrow. So there is an issue that happened right then at that point. And I think there's an evolution and it was about timing, right? Because since that moment, then obviously DD started to use it more, and then everything's evolved at this point. Mm-hmm. You can go at this point in history and say, obviously ray tracing has taken over, right? Mm-hmm. But I even talk to Vlado, and Vlado can look at me and it's like, when we started using ray tracing, we were doing it back when, your phone is more powerful than the computers were back then. So, and yet they were still doing ray tracing back then. So now it's like you should have no excuse not to do pure ray tracing.
Well, what's really funny about like what you just said is that Day After Tomorrow, the Orphanage was rendering
with Brazil.
Yeah, they were rendering a majority of their stuff in Maya, but then they were rendering, and this is what blew my mind, is they were rendering their AO passes in Brazil, in Max.
Yep.
And to me, at the time, because I actually went to a SIGGRAPH chapter meeting with Karen Galika. She was presenting Day After Tomorrow, so she went through the whole thing. The one thing I gathered from her whole talk was that she basically spent the entire project telling everyone it's not her fault. So, because it seemed like there was a lot of stuff going on.
Well, it was a heavy politics battle, right? I mean, it's Roland Emmerich, right? Yep. So the thing about Roland Emmerich, Who's actually a really interesting guy. I really like
just had a meeting
working with
those
Roland.
guys like 2 weeks ago. So.
But when you come in there is like the guy who did Independence Day, right? And I'm just saying that as Independence Day because what's important about understanding when I say the guy who did Independence Day is that was one of the first. That is one of the first $1 billion movies, right?
Yeah.
That was one of the first movies that made $1 billion, and so I think things may have changed, but at the time there was only like 5 or 6 directors that got final cut, and he got final cut. And this is not, and I'm talking about people who get final cut are like Steven Spielberg, and then Roland Emmerich, right? So Roland Emmerich is not necessarily producing high art movies.
No, he's doing popcorn flicks.
He's doing popcorn flicks, and he's good at it enough that they know that he can make $1 billion movie. So they're letting him do whatever the fuck he wants, right?
Yeah.
So Fox Studio at the time was like, we trust you. You want to hire Karen Galikas to do this, and then suddenly things aren't going right, and they're scared. Obviously, they're scared, right? And Roland suddenly has to play politics in this situation, and he was a really interesting guy. He did a good job of trying to handle it. In the end, it was fine. I think I'm happy if the work was there. A lot of my work is up on the screen. I'm happy with that. It's fine. It's not a great movie. I don't even care, you know. But it was interesting, actually. Just a few days ago, my wife was turned on the TV, and it was the Fox logo came up, and I heard like 2 notes, and I was like, I think that's Day After Tomorrow, and I nailed it. It didn't even roll on to like the credits.
Yep.
I was like, I think that's Day After Tomorrow. It's like, how did he know that? And I hadn't even watched the movie in years, but it was so ingrained in my mind.
It always is.
Yeah.
I've had
that was my first big movie, so
I've watched like films, and like I'm like, this seems familiar, and I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. Like it for some reason I'm the other way. It's like repressed memories or whatever. I'm like, I'll be watching something. I'm like, why is this familiar to me? And it's just like, oh, I know why, because it fucking 6 weeks of my life will never get back.
Yeah. Yep.
But no, that's cool. That's really cool. I actually had a meeting with. Like, because Roland Emmerich's doing Independence Day 2 at the moment.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I know I can say that because it's on IMDb, so...
Okay.
So, you know, but yeah, I mean, like, you know, it's kind of interesting because, like, he's definitely had, like, you know, typically he's done a lot of stuff with Volker Engel, who, you know, did Godzilla, did Independence Day.
Volker's such a nice guy.
Yeah. I met him at a party once. I actually met him the other day.
He used to come back... okay, I love it. So we mentioned it before in passing, but Digital Domain sort of at the height of Day After Tomorrow, and this actually started on Day After Tomorrow. I can tell it. Let's do a little history lesson here. So what happened on Day After Tomorrow, there's this guy named Rocco, right? Rocco worked downstairs for me at DD, and he was one of the most interesting characters around, and he's very rockabilly, but his name was Rocco, right? So... nice guy, sweet guy, just
oh shit,
charmer.
I know Rocco.
Yeah,
I've met him a few times.
Okay, so he brought in every Friday this antique little case, which was when you click it open, it was like a leather case. You click it open, and it would hold 4 martini glasses and a shaker, right? And that's basically what he did. And so I went downstairs and hung out with Rocco and the guys. There was 3 guys around his pod area, and they're like, "Oh, great!" And so we'd hang out, and he would basically mix martinis at his desk. So what happened is Friday I would go around, and he needed to find a way to, because I was upstairs. He needed to signal me that there was martini night happening, and we would go down. He went to show me. So he'd basically go on the intercom. You know when you page someone on the intercom. And he'd basically put his martini shaker in the intercom, go, and that was my like Pavlovian bell to go downstairs and have a martini, start drooling and go downstairs. And so I would hang out. So it was basically the 4 of us having a martini at his desk, which then grew and to the parties. And at the height of the martini nights at DD, it literally, there was a bar outside, as you know, there was DJs and all this crazy stuff that would happen. And it was like a big thing that happened pretty much almost every Friday.
Yep.
Several hundred people would be outside, and it would be this organic thing that grew. And DD was very good at finding a balance of making that work, where it kind of worked in a good way, and people could celebrate it, and they would enjoy being at work. And this is during the Scott Ross days, and Scott really loved sort of making that happen and celebrate that. But there'd also be, because it was well known in the visual effects industry, to be a lot of outside people that would show up.
Right.
And Volker Engel would show up.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And he showed up. Oh, he was such a nice guy, and he would just chat with us. He would just be hanging out with Volker, and he showed up in a DeLorean, which was his car. And Volker had a DeLorean, and his license plate was something like VFX ID4.
Nice.
And it was, and he was just like, hey, and it was like, oh my God, is that your DeLorean? He's like, yeah. He's like, you want to go for a ride? You know, and like he would like take us rides on his DeLorean, and he was
so cool.
such a nice guy. And he would, and we were talking about like, oh, all the politics, and we'd just bitch at him like about all the crap that was going on about whatever, and he would just like, yeah, well, it happens, you know. And he was just a nice guy, and he just made us feel like I'm talking to Volker, you know, and he wasn't trying to be superior or trying to play it off as political. He was just making it sound like we could just hang out with him and chat with him. And so I've always loved Volker at that point.
He's a super nice guy. I met him at Danny and Stefan, the owners of Scanline. They're having a party up at their place up in Playa Vista or Playa del Rey. I always get them confused, but yeah. So that was a big weekend. I had about an hour's sleep over 3 days.
All the Germans always hang out together, though.
Yeah. But yeah, like, you know, just casually end up chatting to him. Like, I knew who he was, but just kind of didn't mention it. But yeah, he's just like, you know, really super nice guy, really down to earth, and just the fact that he just randomly be like, oh yeah, I remember on like Godzilla or this and that, and it's just,
I know, right?
You know, yeah. So,
yeah, he just like drops these little bombs of knowledge, like, oh yeah, tell me about that. And it's like, oh yeah. Yeah.
But it's great. I love that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, yeah, super nice guy, super knowledgeable, and, you know, you can't help but be a bit of a fanboy when, like, you know the movies he's done, because, like, you know, they're the kind of stuff that when I was in 3D trying to get a job, starting out at the beginning of my career, I'm like going to see Independence Day, then like going home at night to like, you know,
and
redo everything.
And he really knows his stuff, though. And he really is a super, like, he's got a great eye. I've seen him in action, and he's a really good guy. He nails it, and he just moves forward. So I really like Volker. I would love to work with him more, even though I don't even work in visual effects anymore. But I would love to just at least like tap into that a little bit. Yeah.
I had a meeting with him about 2 weeks ago, but I don't know what I can and can't say about it, so I'm just going to leave
it. Don't tell me.
But
keep me posted. Maybe you'll be on my podcast, and you can we can talk about this.
Yeah, I ended up. Yeah, I've got my goals for the year, and it was probably the most. I even said it was the most difficult decision I had to make, but like, I'm doing my best to try and like focus on my own stuff this year. But for me, it was just like I told him too. It was just like getting to talk to them and everything that was going on. Like, it was just really
awesome.
Cool. But that's great, man. Like, I guess just covering the whole DD aspect, I mean, what was your most challenging project there, do you think? Including recent projects too.
Okay, so I'll just skip through a few things. Basically, after Stealth, I ended up leaving DD, and I ended up going to Sony for a while, and I worked on what was it, Ghost Rider, which was fine. What was interesting to me was...
I was going to give you shit about that.
Yeah, and you should, because it was a crappy movie. And I actually, to be honest, I've never actually seen the movie. And there's several of them. But what was interesting to me about Sony was it was a very good company to work for in terms of the fact that it was very, very organized. Things were like running on perfect timing. I mean, in terms of the production side of things, it was beautiful. It was a boring project, right? Very boring. It's a crappy movie. Everyone has crappy movies. This was just my first no drama, no politics, just like straight up done movie. And I was bored. Paycheck, right? Paycheck movie. So it was my first paycheck type movie. And I was very bored. And I'd sit there in my cubicle. I never talked to anyone around me. Beautiful cubicle, by the way. All Herman Miller furniture, because that's what they had at Sony at the time.
Sony, are you stealing? It's probably the most corporate building I've ever been in, with the exception of Rhythm and Hughes in their latest office before they closed.
But it was very nice, and I liked it. And one of the most interesting part of that project, one of my VFX supervisor on the time, was Kevin Mack, right? Kevin Mack is a super interesting guy, hilarious XDD guy as well.
Okay.
I knew at the time that I wanted to grow into more of a supervisor type level project. I wanted to figure that out. So I actually went to Kevin Mack and said, hey, can I invite you out to lunch? And I'd love to pick your brain about stuff. And he said, okay. And this was hard at the time because if you're a VFX supervisor at any big thing, it's like finding that slot where you're going to talk to some random lighting artist is hard, right? So I picked his brain about it, and he's like, yeah, all right, fine. And so I took him out to lunch, and he looked at me and goes, well, I'm not going to try to give you advice to tell you to quit Sony. But my advice to you is to try to work on smaller projects where you have more
really
opportunity to find those little gems. And you're not going to find that at Sony because you're going to have to work for 10 years to get up to that ladder or whatever you're going to have to do. You're going to have a nice cushy job like I had, right, to do that. And you're going to have to find this opportunity to do that, which is, I was like, all right, I'll think about that. At which point I got a call from Rob Niederhorst. And he said, I'm about to do this crazy thing in LA with this company out of Michigan called SpeedShape and blah, 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 blah. And he told me about this. And I said, all right, let's do it. And so that was my push. It was Kevin Mack telling me, try something different, do smaller things. And then Rob giving me the opportunity to do that. So I did. And I was not at SpeedShape very long. I didn't necessarily feel that it was the right environment for me, but it was enough for me to push out of that.
Right.
It was nothing to do with Rob, by the way. It was Rob's an amazing guy, and I really love
SpeedShape.
Yeah, SpeedShape. SpeedShape had its own little issues in terms of what they were trying to actually do.
Yep.
But so I moved out of that, but what happened was I got interested into the whole car things because of SpeedShape. So that's why I just organically took that and just moved right over to Sway. And Sway
seems like a good progression.
Yeah, and so Sway was the right decision to make. And what happens when I was at Sway is I made some really, really, really strong connections with a bunch of very talented artists that I still work with.
Was Carlos Ingiano there at the time? Because it would have been around that time.
Carlson?
No, Carlos Ingiano. You would know him. He's very
Carlos,
loud.
Carlos, yes. Carlos had left Sway when I got there, but I know him. He went to DD after that.
Right, so
he worked on Tron, on the Tron teaser.
Yeah, because Aaron
Powell.
Yeah, Aaron was over there, originally souping the teaser, and then he took it over for a bit.
Yep.
Because I remember Carlos went over to Sway, around 06, was it? Around
I
there?
don't remember the dates. Yeah, it was probably about that time.
Because you guys.
Yeah. I went to Sway in 06 or 07. Yeah. And it was good. So I was at Sway for a while, and it went pretty well. And then I decided to shift over to a different commercial company, and it was Method at the time.
Right.
And back when I went to Method, it was still the small boutique Method, like kind of flame shop with a little bit of a 3D place, and they were a little bit out of the box.
Not the giant machine that they are today.
Not the giant machine they were today, right? And so the giant machine they are today was something called Riot at the time, right?
I didn't know that.
So Riot was there. They're owned by the same company. They were owned by Ascent Media at the time. And so as Method and Riot were only like a few blocks from each other. And then I got there, and we knew they were part of Ascent Media, et cetera, and we had to work with Riot, and Riot was doing more bigger projects, and Method was always the really cool little boutique flame place.
I love the stuff they're doing, especially early 2000s.
Yeah,
a lot more design stuff.
Yeah,
a lot more creative.
And so that's where I joined in, and then what happened is that the two companies merged. So nope, Riot's gonna go away. It's going to be called Method because Method had a better name for the exact reasons that you just described. And so the name Riot went away, and it all became Method. And then there was all kinds of weird-ass turnover that was happening at the time. But because I came from Sway, and because I was able to bring in more car work and more car projects, I was like the car guy, right?
Yeah.
Which is fun. I was the car guy, And I had a car team that I work with, and I was like.
So did you bring over a lot of the guys from Sway?
I brought a couple of guys from Sway, but it was mostly like my top-notch guys, and then training a bunch of other people, and it worked out pretty well. The only thing I couldn't really bring from Sway, which was what made Sway special at the time, was their car simulator. They had a car simulator
I heard
called
about
Tron,
it. Yeah.
which nothing can make a car motion look as good as that driving simulator. I've never seen anything do it.
Who developed it?
Graham Fife.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Graham Fife at the time. Well, it's still being maintained by what
Big Block.
Sway is, Big Block, yeah. But Graham Fife, who now works at ICT, he works for Paul Lebevic. So
Right.
So yeah, it's really kind of a special package that like nothing can make that look right. And so basically, what's the idea is like you could, instead of actually animating a car, you had a steering wheel pedal. You could literally just drive the car and stunt drive it on your own, and it would come in keyframed 60 frames a second perfectly.
That's awesome.
And it even tire deformations, everything. So it was a really kind of animating a car was not animating a car, was driving a car. And did you like that take? All right, no problem. I'll do it again. You literally just drive the car.
That's great.
So I just a little side note about that. It was so good that one of our executive producers, who at Sway at the time, she used to work in live action. She used to do a bunch of live action stuff, and she said, "I'm going to bring in this stunt driver that I work with, and I want him to see this stuff. And he's great, and he's kind of retired now, but maybe he could help us, like." Make really cool car moves and like sort of advise us and be in this area and see that. So he's like, all right. And so he came in, and he was a stunt driver. Like you could tell, like this guy's a badass, right? Like just comes in rough and tough, right? Mm-hmm. And he looks at it and he's like, all right, let me see what you got. And he is showing him the demos, and we're showing him the results rendered, like how it looks exactly like what we did. And he's like silent the whole time. I was like, oh shit, he thinks it looks shitty. It's like, did we fuck up the simulation? Did we do something wrong? I was like, nah. And it's like, and he looks at our EP at the time. Her name was Shira, and he goes, Shira, can I talk to you in a bit? And he goes, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I will never, ever, ever support you because you're going to put all of my friends out of business.
That's great. That's the ultimate compliment.
And he said, if I support this, then that means that all the guys that I know that drive cars for a living are going to have to pay for it, because the fact is, you just show me you took your car and jumped it over a 25-foot jump, and you crashed several times, and there was no risk. Mm-hmm. I get paid $25,000 to take that risk, or $100,000 to take that risk. You got paid nothing, and the agency is going to look at you like, just do it higher and higher and higher until you get it right. And so, therefore, it was a problem. So, yeah, taking that risk was a problem. I remember that would resonate to me. It's like, ugh.
But that's it. That's just it. Like digital doubles, like doing like digital pyrotechnics, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Like that's where it's all heading. Where you do have a majority of safety, and that's why a lot of the insurance guys on set, like they love CGI. They're pushing it all the way because
right.
They don't have to pay out. Like,
and these guys, I'm just put it in perspective. Like these guys are like the stunt drivers, where they're looking at, they measure the incline of the road that they're driving, and that scales their paycheck.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's how nitty gritty the unions get about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Whereas like CG people don't have a union, they get screwed the whole time. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating. But I don't know. It's kind of cool that you actually did that. I was kind of hoping he'd say that he's going to sit down and like show you guys some moves, but I guess
nope, never did. He walked out the door.
Man,
he walked out the door. And so anyway, so cars was a big thing for me, right? And so, and then when things were happening and stuff like that, and then DDE started to take V-Ray more seriously. We talked about that. They got back in touch with me about Tron, and they were like, "Oh, I want to get started on Tron," and it's like that. And so I was like, "Do I want to get back into features?" Because I was seeing stuff, and I decided I was going to do that. And the irony, of course, is that they put me on the light bike sequence, which is pretty much a big car commercial.
Right.
It's pretty much a car commercial about light bikes, which was fine. I was good at that. I knew all the things I had to do. And then Eric, that was my first relationship with Eric Barba, who's to be honest, he's an extremely hard person to get along with. At first, until you earn his trust, which takes a long time, and then you sort of look around, because Eric Barba and I on Tron, we were fighting all the time. Although he knew my background, he understood it. We were fighting all the time, and I was just like frustrated and then after that he's like, yeah, I want you on my next feature, and then he's like completely different relationship. Now he's like, yep.
You've proven yourself.
You've proven yourself, right? And he does that. And some people need to do that. They need to like just wear you down, like get that. And that's a good thing. Creatively speaking, you don't want you need that testing period. It's good, and he's all into that. He's come from, Art Center and all that stuff. So he's really a big guy into that.
I've had those projects where like you're blatantly butting heads with certain people on the project. And the thing is that like, There's people who are personalities and they're just fucking things up. But then there's other people where you're going to butt heads. But even though the people around you mightn't get it, like they might be like, wow, like those people don't get along. It's just more like, no, like this is part of the process. Like I want this and he wants that, or she wants this. And we're going to disagree. We're going to fight and argue about it. And that's how it's going to get done. But at the end of the day, we could go out for a beer and it's not a big thing. It's like, It doesn't mean that there's some like passion there to like hate each other. It's just more like, look, we both got to stand our ground. We got to push through this. But, no one, at least for me, it's always been like, you don't take it personally. You're just going to, at the end of the day, it's like whatever. And you laugh about it, you move on. But
absolutely. And the thing with I found it was interesting, over the years, I worked on several Eric Barba projects.
You were blessed.
Well, I was. I mean, but and it wasn't. You know what? I'll tell you what I did differently is that I didn't actually. I didn't go to him. It's like whatever Eric wants, Eric gets. He wasn't, to me. He wasn't king. Mm-hmm. He was the person that I respected and had a good eye, but he wasn't the king, right?
Right.
And so, it's very hard to win an argument with him. I'll tell you that right off the bat. But if you have something really good and you have to go in there with a lot of ammunition and you're like, here's what I'm going to present to you and this is what I have to do. And if you have good stuff, he's going to go, all right, you win this one. You're absolutely right.
Great.
But you have to have that, right? You can't just, because otherwise he's just like, he doesn't have time to go back and forth and blah, 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 blah. You have to like, all right, I disagree with Eric, but the only way I'm going to win this is I got to come in there and go like, here, this is what it's going to be, and then it'll work, because just being angry at him because he said something that you didn't like your work, he probably has a reason for that, and you're angry because you worked all night on it, and that's not a valid enough reason to say that it's better than the other reason, so that's the thing, right? You have to like really think about it. Like he's saying that because he's had a good night's sleep and he's thought about it and looked at it and goes, that doesn't look right.
Yep.
And he's probably right. And you're like, oh, I worked all night on it. It's like, he's not going to go, I'm sorry, Chris, I'm sorry. Let's work it out. Do you want a hug? Like, no, he's not the fucking you want a hug. No, he's like, just do it, So that I respect, to be honest. But if he says something that's like, I don't like this, and you're like, no, I've really, 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 really thought about it, and I think it's the right choice. You gotta find a way to say that, and I'll tell you what, it does work, and he will work that, and I respect that about him for sure.
That's good. That's really good. And for you, what do you prefer, feature films or commercials?
Well, okay, so here's my theory about it. I'd say every project you work on, you got about 1 in 5 is some really awesome project. Everything else is either medium or crappy, right? But 1 in 5 is, the problem with feature films is that means you have to wait 9 to 10 months between projects before you can see if the next one's going to be any better or whatever. And if you're lucky, it's awesome. And then you've got 9 to 10 months of an awesome project. With a commercial, it's like If this is a crappy project, don't worry, it'll be
2 weeks
done.
later, you'll be on the next
you'll
thing.
find something else.
Yep.
And those are great, So it's a little bit of that, oh, this is a really great commercial done, et cetera. So but the problem with commercials is that there is no cruising period.
Yeah, there's not enough time.
There's not, so in commercials, it's like, you gotta, and there's no like, well, I really wish I could do this. Like, no, you just have to do it, right? So, but I do like the idea of commercials in the sense that you get through a lot of things really faster. And sometimes, creatively speaking, they're more interesting, right? Because the idea is that in feature films, you always have to play it safe. So you have to do the same thing that people are going to go to the theaters for. But in commercials, you have to do something different every time.
That's
because
right.
That's the only way you're going to get someone's attention, right? So commercials tend to be more creative in some ways.
Yeah.
So it's a balance. They've got their positives and negatives. I like working on features because I get to bond with my team more. And I think sometimes that's something, the more fun part of the process,
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot lately, just in terms of like, film obviously is not as much money as it used to be. Commercials, it can be hit and miss. It can be some that are really tight budget. Other ones, like you get the Holy Grail, where it's like, hey, we've got $1 million. Great,
Right.
let's go to town. But you're right, like they're faster turnaround, which is what I prefer. And at the same time, they're always trying to do something new and interesting.
Right.
You're not going to do an advertisement that's the same old thing. It's going to be, unless it's a gecko, but like for the most part,
Sure.
it's going to be something new and abstract and different. Feature films, it can be cool, but yeah, you could spend a lot of time on those, and especially you're the bigger studios, it's going to be like 6 months, 9 months, So yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to both, and that's why I'm kind of curious about it. You specialize obviously in doing more like photoreal stuff, and that's what you're really good at doing. I'm kind of curious, like, what's your typical process? And of course, that's going to be different for every project, but like everyone has a bit of a process when they begin, like when they start on a shot, and like certain points in the project, like certain things you do over and over that really kind of make or break, or make a big impact on what you do. So what is your overall process in terms of like when you initially approach a shot through to the end for trying to get something that looks real? And if you want to use a car as an example, you're more than welcome. But
Absolutely. Car is a perfect example, because basically what I try to do is I try to use the same process that you would do for any live action. So my goal is to simplify the whole process, right? I remember very specifically, this is something that happened to me on iRobot. The VFX supervisor on iRobot was never a CG guy. He was a sort of a live action miniature type supervisor. His name is Eric Nash, and he's actually been nominated for a couple of awards, and he's a great guy. But he said he knows how to light a shot practically, right?
Yep.
Because that's what he came from. And he came up to me and was like, you know what, Chris, I need to understand, in order for me to give you a better critique of these robots on iRobot, I need to understand how you're lighting them. And back in the RenderMan days, it was like I had 25 spotlights on these characters, right? And he's like, you have 25, where are you getting 25 spotlights? It like made no sense. The idea of an area light was not even possible back
right,
then.
and you don't have to have as much bounce or anything.
And no
either,
bounce,
so.
and it's like, yeah. It's like, no, so the idea is like, light it the way it's really lit. So the best way for you to approach lighting is to actually light it correctly. Light it the way a car is lit. And if you look at the way a car is lit, it's actually lit with a gigantic area light.
Yeah.
And make it balance it on that car perfectly to make it look right, and not put a bunch of spotlights. It's actually a matter of very small tweaks on one light or two lights at best. And that's it. You don't have to sit there because I want a spotlight here, a spotlight there, and that's not how it's done. And the more you do it correctly, that way, the same is true. And the same with characters, right? Key fill.
Yep.
Those are laws that have been used in film for a long time. And a DP has about 5-10 minutes to light a shot. There's no reason why you should take any more time to light your own shot.
You heard it here first. Like 5 to 10 minutes per shot to light your shots from now on, moving forward.
But I mean, that's what they do.
Yeah,
Now they have faster feedback than you do because they're dealing with real life.
Yeah.
But literally, they know, like, I'm going to need a key here, a fill there, and a this there, and the rest is ambient light. They know exactly what they need to do. I need a bounce card here, and they do that. And if you do that correctly, because can you imagine if you're a DP and you sat there and set 4 hours to light a character? You'd be fired in seconds. Since you're dealing with real lighting now, real GI, real everything else, that's all it should take to light a shot. Then just bang through it. Then it's just a matter of going through the farm and going, that you should be able to understand lighting just like a photographer. Basically, a lighter is the DP in CG.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, actually.
Yeah.
And that's the thing for me, like, my hat goes off to both the AD and also the DP, because, like, those two guys, I mean, everything relies on them. It's not the director. The director has got the easiest job in the world. He's got to tell
the director is the only person that if he's not there on set, that's the only, you're fine. Mm-hmm. If there's anyone else missing on set, you're screwed. But if the director's not there, you're still got a shot. Now, I'm not disparaging the director, because the reason that shot's happening is because it's the director's vision. But in terms of actual producing the things,
you look like a pilot. Okay, the person drives the plane, but if there's a bolt missing from the plane, it might fall out of the sky.
Right.
So, and that's why, like, you get the second AD will typically do a lot of the pickups and everything else and run around. Like, you can do a lot of the additional shots, especially VFX stuff, without the director being there. If it's like, okay, well, we're going to blow up the stunt guy, fine, we'll go do that, and then the emotional stuff will make sure we get the talent to give the performance we wanted.
For your listeners, I think the best hint to do is if you ever are on set or you ever have to be on set, don't make friends with the director. The director is fine. Make friends with the AD, because the AD is the only person that's going to make sure you have the right amount of time to do what you need to do. So the assistant director is way more important to you than the director is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Without a doubt. Like, he's the one who's calling the shots, and like it. Again, I'm in awe just over, like, the AD's job is just got to be the most stressful job.
Because he's the one keeping the schedule.
He needs to know every single person. He needs to know everything that's going on. He needs to be on radio the whole time.
Yeah.
So
I think that is one of the biggest things, that when you go on set and you're actually dealing stuff, you realize, like, the director himself or herself is not actually doing as much as the assistant director is actually is the well-oiled machine, right? So
like on God of War, we shot that in North Hollywood, and I remember on that, like, we knew the shots we needed, and we would be able to go through and get everything we needed, but the ADs were the one, he was the one who's running around doing his thing. The DP, would make sure he's got, all the right lights set up for everything he needs, but it all came down to the AD, and like that was for me the first time I really kind of began to appreciate, like, holy shit, like, this guy is like making this whole thing work. Without that, the whole thing would fall apart, and like it's so vital. But you're absolutely right. That's good advice. Is make friends with him, because he's the one who's going to give you the few extra minutes to make sure you get your HDRs and everything else you need.
Otherwise, it's like if you piss them off, it's like, you got 30 seconds to make your HDR, and I gotta move on.
And that's the tricky thing too. Is like, even if you're a VFX soup, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Like, they'll keep moving on. Like, you're like, hey, I need to measure the sets. Like, fuck you, we're going, we're moving on. So they don't care about, like, not they, but like typically a lot of people won't care about the process, won't understand it, and for them, you're just a nuisance. You're holding them up. So, holding your
be
ball.
Be friends with the DP. Oh, I mean the AC, because AD. Sorry, because that's really
Absolutely
what counts. Yep.
That's great. And can you talk a bit about what I mentioned before, but the New Yorker project? So Dan Rorty, you Paul DeBevic.
So okay. So since I've since left the VFX business, and I ended up working directly for Chaos Group, and it was a kind of an important decision for me. And I worked at the idea was basically that Longros, who I've known for years, and he started in LA, and he says, I want to sort of build up the LA office, and he hired me, or he and Flado and Peter got to me and hired me as a creative director. But they've known me for years. They've known all the things that you guys just heard and all these stories. So they know that I've actually been working in this industry for a while. And they wanted to see what else I could do. And one of the ideas that Lon came up with was something called Chaos Group Labs. It was like, let's see what we can do in this little idea. It's like Chris knows a bunch of people. There's a bunch of people in LA that do crazy things in terms of this idea. So what can we do to sort of create a little incubator project out of this? And that's basically what was the born idea of that. We thought about a bunch of projects. The first big one we did was actually not the Dan Rorty project, but the first one we did was actually working with Kevin Margo. And so Kevin, we have this thing that we do at Chaos Group called Partners in Art, where we try to support people who are doing independent projects or something like that, and they come up to us like, hey, I've got this great idea, I want to make something happen, and I'd like some support from Chaos Group, would you do that? And we review these projects, and they're great, and we help support them. So Kevin, who we'd known from Blur for years, and he's like, I want to do my short about this robot thing. And he came up to us and about that, and it's like, great, no problem. And instead of just telling him, like, here's a bunch of V-Ray licenses, go to town.
Yep.
Same time, we were approached by NVIDIA saying, hey, we've got these new K6000 cards, and they've got 12 gigs of video memory, and we feel that this card is powerful enough that you can do final frame rendering on it, and therefore no longer consider the video card as a
Real,
look-dev tool and more as a final frame rendering tool. So I went to Kevin and was like, hey, so got these really cool, very expensive, that also helps, when you're trying to sell very expensive things that you can get to make your short, and we could do something really interesting on the video card. He was all in. So he took that project and like, let's do it, and started developing it with the video card in mind. And that sort of blew up in a lot of ways. And in the true idea of it is like, I sort of helped them, what can we do to make it happen? So I sort of became sort of a producer on this a little bit.
Right.
And in terms of enabling him to do whatever he wanted to do. And so it was him and his buddies, nights and weekends, figuring out what he could do.
I was meant to work on the damn thing. Unfortunately, he emailed me over November, December, and it, for me, is the crash point of my year where like I basically decided some things got to change because like I'm still replying to emails from that month. So he sent me like all the info like I needed to help out or want to wrap it all by like mid-January, and about mid-January is when I finally found the email in my inbox. Right. And I'm like, oh fuck, but it looks great.
It really grew. So just as an example, is it started off as we just went final frame rendering on the GPU. Right. That's all that NVIDIA's goal was. But because Kevin is Kevin, right, and he's thought about it and goes, these things are so ridiculously fast. Can we actually get it to happen while you're motion capturing? And that was his idea about like, can we do ray tracing in Motion Builder? At which point I said, why the hell would you want to do that? I didn't have no idea why you would want to do that. And Vlado even said, why would you want to do that? But Vlado looked at it as a different exercise, which was awesome because he looked at it and it's like, we have this thing called V-Ray App SDK, which is this interesting idea that he has, which is V-Ray, to put V-Ray inside of a package. Let's say you want to make V-Ray inside of Houdini, right? You actually have to like know some serious C++ or whatever you want to do that. So what they did is they made something called V-Ray App SDK. And what V-Ray App SDK does is it puts a wrapper around V-Ray where instead of actually having to program in a very low-level programming language, you can actually integrate V-Ray as a standalone thing with just simple scripting languages like Python, Java, whatever.
Right.
And so that's how they put he said, I'm going to look at this V-Ray for Motion Builder thing as a V-Ray App SDK example. Does that work? And I'm not kidding, it was not very long before he went, okay, done. And then like 2-3 weeks later, there was like the initial parts of V-Ray inside of Motion Builder that were ready to go. And it was rendering, and you could like see characters doing things, and it's like, oh crap, We didn't even know. And then I got it. Then the light bulb went off because I didn't understand what Kevin was actually talking about. I was like, why would you render inside of a motion capture program?
So suddenly it isn't like what everyone's trying to focus on now, which is like, oh, you're on set and you're in your volume cube here and you can see garage shaded thing. It's like, no, you're actually seeing like close to final frames in real time. Like,
and more important than that, this is Kevin's mentality, and I'm totally on board with it because of exactly what we were just talking about before, where I said, light it like you're really on set. Mm-hmm. Now you're in a motion capture volume, and you're using real lights, etc. So now you can take the DP and go, now you're on set. Look through this window in V-Ray, move that light the way you want it, and have the actor do what you want to do correctly, and now it's a real set with the real shaders.
Could you actually get mimic the lighting on set in the scene in real time? Like say, okay, there's a light over there.
Yep.
This many watts. We'll just quickly throw that into the shot.
So you would basically have digital grips and digital focus pullers and all that stuff. And then now, what I think is interesting is that there isn't, besides Cameron using his own thing in Avatar, put a freaking techno crane on set. Put real dollies and grips and stuff like that. Get real camera moves on there. Really explore that. That's what I would love to do. I would actually love to get a DP and give him, say, Kevin's handholds the camera because that's what he wants for his action sequences, which totally works. But what if you put a DP and shot a love story with CG characters and have them like really light it correctly, and then the actors would know like, oh, they could see what it looks like and could move in and out of the light. That's what's important. And then on the CG side of things, it's no longer I have to build the asset twice, once for real time, once for rendering. It's the same asset. You just like, and that's the nice thing about it is like it's just the same asset. And V-Ray works on the GPU or the CPU, so even if you don't have a GPU farm, you can still render it out the same way.
That was one point, like at ILM, like again, I wasn't there for the longest period, but like that was like a really big game changer. There was that when things started to switch over to GPU, it just kind of clicked. It made sense. Like, okay, well, we can buy expensive video cards, and as they get older, they don't become like redundant hardware anymore. It's actually a hand-me-down that's actually really efficiently used because one department like effects doing fluid simulations on the GPU, which you guys are developing too with Phoenix. Yep. That initially you need really robust GPUs, but eventually it becomes more of a compositing or rendering application for other stuff as well.
Sure.
Bit by bit, those video cards will always get used. It's not like RAM and stuff like that you're going to throw out the door because it's old and archaic very quickly. So I
don't know. I think GPU technology is growing so fast to me. And you're right. Like old video cards are not necessarily bad, but when it comes to rendering, I mean that technology. I mean, I've seen the plateau, and I'm sure
you have like a Banshee.
I've
or
seen
a
the plateau of CPUs like hit like several years. Like buying a new CPU is not going to get you that much performance anymore, but GPUs, it's like it's going up now.
So it's so quick that the GPUs from like a year ago are pretty redundant, you think? Or
I don't know if they're redundant. I mean, I don't know how much I can say, but there's a lot of. I think GPU technology is going to grow quite a bit. I think you can see
it's
actually
the future.
The new Maxwell cards I think are actually pretty impressive, and I don't know what's the next thing after that. So there's a lot of things that are happening, and on all sides of the GPU spectrum, but massive parallel rendering, which is what Plato has called it, where you're no longer rendering on 12 or 16, you're rendering on 20,000 cores or whatever it is. That's what a VCA is, right? So we're rendering on a lot of cores, and it's like crazy. And that's what that's V-Ray for motion build was one thing, but now we've got Kevin, just to put it as an example, right? So we benchmarked it where one of Kevin's scenes on Construct and you can tell this. This makes complete sense if you've ever worked in CG, but it's got all the depth of field, all the GI, everything's done brute force out of the box, right? And an HD frame takes about 3 hours to render with all of that stuff, right? And we're talking about 40 cores, something like that. On the VCA machine, which is a machine that costs $50,000, right? That's the sticker price on it. But it's got 8 K6000s in it, right? And it's hardcore GPU. It does it in 7 minutes. So you're going from 3.5 hours to 7 minutes. That's a huge speed jump. And yes, so it's $50,000, but think about that. That's only taking up 4 U racks on if you've ever built a render farm. It's only taking up 4 U's. It takes more power than normally 4 U's does, but you pretty much need 1 rack of those, and you can do a lot of computational power.
If you want to look to your left right now, you can see my really embarrassing home render farm.
Right, yeah.
I've got a few more nodes downstairs.
But yeah,
absolutely. So it's really efficient space-wise, but it's something.
It's loud as hell too, because it's
yeah,
because it's all fan-based. They don't have any water cooling in them.
I remember.
And we have one in our office, which NVIDIA has been really cool to let us try out. But that's part of my thing is like, let's see how fast we can push this technology. I want to render at 30 frames a second.
That's awesome. I'll just say this is kind of funny, but like Frantic Films were setting up Frantic Films Sydney at one point years ago, and it ended up not happening. So I ended up going back to my home. I was working like in my home city, Brisbane, and I ended up taking the render blades with me, and they're so fucking loud. And my girlfriend at the time like hated them because I just had these 2 render blades just sitting in the living room pretty much, just like really loud, just 24 hours a day. Drove her nuts. So like one of my buddies at IBM, he was going to come over and essentially like reroute the air to kind of like make him a bit quieter. Like it's just but like having that shit around you is just fucking drive you insane.
I remember going through a period when I had some workstation that I had made. I don't remember what it was, and my wife was laughing at me about how much effort I was putting into not making it faster, just making it quieter. Like putting foam inside and finding around like things to do to make it quieter, and it's like impossible. And finally, it's like just water cool it. Something to do. But we have it in our background, and it's a VCA machine is not meant to be out in the open, right? It's a loud, hardcore, powerful machine. So it's been a lot of fun. So that's the big project we worked on.
Well, I want to keep on that for a few more minutes, and then just because like I think it's pretty interesting. Like that project is all GPU rendered, and so how are you guys helping out with that? Obviously supplying the VCA, but like what else are you guys doing in terms of like? I think it's a great kind of case study or test model to kind of test a lot of your tech. And
we're testing a bunch of tech, as you mentioned, right? And the cool thing, and this is very much Indie Labs mentality, right? So we started off the project where Kevin comes up to us, says, I want to render a short, and then NVIDIA comes up to us, we want to render on a GPU. That's where it started.
So your power connector.
That was the goal, the benchmark start goal, right? And if we did that, then we've already accomplished that. It's done, right? But the idea of a lab is like you keep testing new ideas and doing new things, and you never know where it's going to go. You never settle for anything. That's what I think is so much nicer about like my goal as opposed to production. It's like my goal is to get the shot done and looks good. Like I'm saying, I don't know where the shot's going to go. It's going to do something different. So what happened also, another thing that happened on Construct was we were just in the middle, right after we presented what we did at GTC. We're going to present some new stuff for Construct at GTC this year, so look out for it. It'll be out in a few weeks. So GTC round 2 of Construct is coming out, and new stuff is happening. But one of the things that happened in the meantime is right after GTC, we went to NAB. And we were at NAB, and NVIDIA invited us very nicely to present at their booth, and we just basically showed off we're rendering Construct, all GPU based, and it's really cool. And so one of the people that came up to us like, tell me more about this super fast rendering thing you're doing, was Doug Trumbull. I don't know if you know who Doug Trumbull is. For those who aren't familiar, Doug Trumbull is a visual effects supervisor who's extremely famous. He did 2001, he did Close Encounters, a bunch of other things. So pretty famous guy. He's done a really big stuff. And he's really, really interesting. one of the things he has been developing is one of his new projector systems that he's fascinated with, which is to be the most immersive projector systems that you can be around, and it's called the Magi system. And you've heard of stereo, you've heard of 48 FPS or whatever you're going to do to high frame rate stuff to get out there. What the Magi system is 4K stereo 120 frames a second. Okay, so if you do the math on what 4K stereo 120 frames a second is compared to HD 24p, which is what most people do, it's 40 times more rendering than you would normally be doing, right?
Yep.
It's a huge amount of rendering. And he looks at us and goes, because your rendering is so much faster, could you actually do construct at that level, right? And so we approached us about it, and we did it. So we actually have the construct teaser. We re-rendered it at those specs.
Okay.
So we have the construct teaser. No one can see it unless you go to a screening room that has that capability.
You look on YouTube, everyone's like, it looks the same.
No, it looks amazing,
Yeah.
because I've actually seen it, and I'm not a high frame rate guy. I'm the guy who, and I've had this discussion with Doug about it, and you gotta realize, like, Doug is, in his 70s, but he knows his shit, man. The guy is amazingly bright, and he complains about, like, it's like, nope, Jackson had it wrong with The Hobbit. 48 FPS is not the right way to go. You have to do it at the frame rate. His point of view is, what does that digital projector project at? 120 hertz? That's what we should be projecting at. We should be projecting at the same frame rate that the projector can do. And your TV that does 120 hertz, that's what it naturally does. And you're just flashing the same frame over and over again. And they try to make it 120 hertz and do that smoothing thing, but that's crap. It's not right. It looks wrong. But if you do it organically correctly, 120 frames hertz, according to Doug, and I've seen it, and it makes sense. It looks amazing.
That's great.
4K stereo, 120 frames a second. It's really thing. The only problem with it
is it's going to cripple VFX.
It's going to cripple your VFX, and the only way it's going to happen is, like, basically, this is an example, right? So Kevin's teaser is 1 minute. He basically asked us to render 40 minutes of CG in a month. Okay? And the only thing we had available to it, and then at which point NVIDIA said, we want to help you out, which was great. The only thing we had available to us was the VCA cluster, which is sitting in Santa Clarita. So I think there's something like 12 or 15 of those machines that are available to us, the VCAs that are sitting on a rack. They're all kind of prototype stuff. I mean, because they obviously sell a bunch of them or whatever, but basically it's like, we'll give you access to these, but they also use it for demos, like, for whatever, because people use GPU rendering for, like, curing cancer and stuff. So every now and then, it's like on a weekend, it's like, can we stop your research for just a second so we can render some robot movie? I felt a little bit embarrassed about it.
I've had that conversation so many times.
Right.
You go to university,
they were super nice about it. They made it work. We worked it out on the schedule, and NVIDIA was really cool about it because they wanted to help Doug out too, And so we produced that, and I actually got to see it, and I was like, wow. So that was really cool. That was a really great project. So like I said, you never know where these research projects are going to go. You're going to do NVIDIA for Motion Builder. You're going to do 4K stereo, 120 frames per second. And I don't think that even Kevin knew. Like, somehow his robot movie is not even the story anymore. It's the making of the robot movie that's even more interesting. It's a great story. I'm not trying to dismiss the story, but there's so many things that we went through in this project that is so awesome.
But that's really awesome because it's going to give it even bigger vehicle to market his project, and I know what his goals are ultimately as well, and I know that will definitely help with that.
And he's doing so great. I mean, the fact is that he's got, and he's so focused on, like, I want to do this, and here's all the steps I need to make happen, and therefore I'm going to make sure that all those ducks are in a row to make that happen. And he's on it. And so that's if you're going to be a director, you want someone like Kevin. Basically goes in and is supposed to, like, I want this, or blah 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 blah, and start yelling or whatever. That's never going to happen. He's like, all right, I want this. In order for that to happen, you have to do this, this, and this, and this to make it happen.
Yo,
So.
sorry, it's my girlfriend.
That's okay.
Hey, you guys have met.
Hi. Good to see you.
Cool. Anyway, we'll be finished soon. All good. No, it's awesome. It's really cool. And what was I going to say? Sorry, lost concentration.
All right.
No, what was I going to say? I had a really valid point. Give me a minute.
Labs, construct. It's all right.
I was going to segue onto something.
Want to talk about WikiHuman yet?
Sorry, say it again?
The WikiHuman project? Or?
Well, no, just before we got into that, I was going to just segue for a second with... actually, yeah, so one thing I was going to bring up is that what are some of the other ways you've seen V-Ray or Chaos Group technology being used that you didn't expect it to ever be used that way? I mean, obviously you look at Construct, that's a perfect example of how you guys are doing crazy stuff that you didn't expect to ever kind of utilize. But what are some other projects or other ways you've seen that?
There's a bunch of things. I think that one of the best things that happened to me is that someone else came up to us recently and said, "I love what you guys have done on Construct. I'd love to be part of that." And I said, "That's awesome. Mm-hmm. What do you want to do?" Right. That was my thing. Is I can't just say, "Yes, we'll do this." It's up to us to have a discussion and figure it out on our own, right? Just like Kevin's I want to do V-Ray inside a motion builder. I didn't think of that. Kevin thought of that.
That's right.
So Kevin thought of that, and we enabled him to make that happen. So the whole part of participating in the labs project is just making something happen out of it. You tell me what you want to do, and I will find a way to make that happen.
Fluids. Let's go.
I want real-time fluids. Fine, it's a great idea. Let's figure that out. Let's get to that point. What does it take to do that? So that's part of what's interesting about labs. And yes, fluid dynamics is a huge thing. That's obviously Vlado and a bunch of guys there are very interested in Phoenix, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a big thing. So just so I can segue a little bit on this, because what happened is, about a year ago, Peter Mitev, who is the CEO of Chaos Group, we were coming around and he was talking about things that we could do to organically grow and showcase. He already saw what was happening with Construct, and he said, well, let's grow on this. I want to do that. And one of his frustrations was, while there's a lot of people that do really great character work in V-Ray, people in the masses don't think of V-Ray as a character render. They think of it as V-Ray, that's for cars and architecture and environments. It's not for character work. So he was frustrated with that because mainly one of the big things that happened in V-Ray 3.0 was a huge push towards pushing character work, right? Lots better skin, hair, speeds improvements in brute force, adding the ability to do skin without necessarily doing the pre-cache, all of that, that material. So it became a big thing, and he's like, well, let's do something really interesting to character. I was like, well, I know character artists, we can make that happen. And as we started talking about it more and more, I said, well, screw it. Let's just go for the hardest thing possible. Instead of actually trying to do some ZBrush character that a lot of people do. Not to say there's anything wrong with that, but instead of just doing some monster thing, look at what we did in V-Ray. People have done that. They said, let's tackle the hardest thing possible. Let's tackle the uncanny valley. And he, his first reaction was ugh, right? The minute I said uncanny valley, everyone's reaction is
what is uncanny valley?
What is the uncanny valley?
Yeah.
All right. So this is a very interesting thing. So the uncanny valley is the idea that when you, the more human you make a character look, you start with a stick figure, right? Stick figure is the simplest representation of a human, right? And then as you get them more and more real, they start to look better and better, and people react to them more humanely, right? And they look really, really, really good. So, and that sort of peaks in a way. My best example of the peak is, think of the human characters on Toy Story 3, right? They look very close to human, but they still look...
Yeah, it's like Tintin,
hyper
real.
Right. But then Tintin my opinion, Tintin starts to dip.
Yeah,
down,
yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then you get into the Polar Express and all this weird stuff where it
looks awkward.
looks so awkward that you actually have a repulsion to the scenario, right? That's the valley. So it's like looks good. No one can see my finger, but basically like my finger is going up, and then when it starts to look too close to human, it actually looks bad.
Yeah.
And there's a dip in there, so it's a bad scenario, right? So, and that's the uncanny valley where it's like it's too much like a human, but not enough that I feel bad. Okay, and then it comes out of that where it looks so much like a human that you don't even realize it's CG. Which in my mind, the first thing that came out of that valley is something like Benjamin Buttons, where most people don't even know that it's a CG character for 2/3 of the movie.
Yep.
They think it's just an old person or something like that.
Yep.
If you've achieved that, then you've broken the uncanny valley. That's the goal, right? So
I guess that's how Paul DeVevick came on board then.
right. So
Yeah.
Paul DeBevick and I talked about it, and became interesting because I went to Paul. I've known Paul for years. Actually, Martini Night it was when I first met Paul. But Paul and I have known each other for years, and we've talked about this. I said, it's like I want to do something. It's like I've got a bunch of artists that I work with that are part of the V-Ray community, right? I had Dan Rorty and Nichols and a couple other people. And I said, I'd love to be able to look at ICT data that is scientifically acquired data and analyze that to remove the idea of the issue with the uncanny valley. Because my reaction, my feeling, having worked on a few digital human projects, is that when someone says it's in the uncanny valley, because of the strong emotional response you get, you overreact as an artist to try to correct the problem, and you never get to your goal. So if I can remove as much of the emotional response that you need and deal with the most scientific data you can, then if I say the diffuse map needs to look like this because it's measured that way, then you're not going to mess with it too much, right? So I said, I went to Paul, I was like, I want that data from ICT where I can say, this is the data and this is how it needs to plug in, where there's no question about that problem. And then we can remove as many variables as possible. Because if I get something scientifically acquired as much as possible, then I can remove that problem. So that was my goal. It's like, let's chop that down.
That's great.
And so he gave me that, and he goes, "Oh, perfect timing. I have a scan of something that I've done, and I need a rendering of this, and I would love to work with you guys to get some great rendering. They've got some great artists at ICT, etc. But he's like, I'd love to do this. Let's partner on this." And so we made it work, and I called Dan Rorty, and Dan Rorty's like, "Well, yeah, I would love to render."
Oh yeah, go help you out.
Yeah. So he was great about it, and he was so nice, and he's like, "Let's do it." And I said, "All right, let's approach this." That was one of the challenges for Dan because he's an artist, right? It's like, I want you to approach this as scientifically as possible.
He's one of the most passionate artists I know.
Right.
Like, yeah, if you go ahead.
And so I said, don't try to interpret the data. Be as much more of a photographer and less of a person that's trying to tweak the shaders and stuff like that. So he did that, and we came up with the very first rendering of Paul. It was literally you used the raw scan data and just rendered that, and it went into an article about digital humans in New Yorker magazine. That was our first thing that came out of labs, which was kind of a cool thing. It was like kind of went out there, and then after that we said, this was kind of cool. So I started talking to more and more people about it. It's like, hey, let's make this group of people that we can start discussing this stuff. Yeah. And again, that was the thing. It's like you started off like, I want to make sure that people know that we can do characters in V-Ray, to, let's start growing this group into this interesting thing. So I started contacting all kinds of people. I started contacting Steve Prieg, who I worked with at DD for years. And he was the animation supervisor on Benjamin Buttons, right? And he'd also... talking about Uncanny Valley, his film was the pinnacle film that he worked on, was Final Fantasy. That is like the start of the CG final, came out. He knows what that's about, right? He understands that, right? And so, I work with him on that and just discussing that. And he's like, I love it. And then it became this big group of guys. And it became this idea like, we're not actually just trying to get out of the uncanny valley. We're just actually just talking about this stuff. We're making a discussion group about it. And then the more we started discussing it,
it's like a brain trust of like
it became a brain trust, right? And so then I started like really looking into it, and I was like, oh well, this person in University of Bolton in the UK, she wrote a book called The Uncanny Valley. She's she's got her PhD in this.
That's great.
So I contacted her, and she goes, I'd love to be part of that. So she became part of it. And then suddenly Paul got in touch with me and was like, hey, by the way, Mike Seymour, who heads FX Guide, he's doing his PhD on digital humans.
Really?
Yes, at University of Sydney.
It blows my mind. Yeah.
So he's like, he's fascinated about it. And I told him about, we called the name of our group, we called it the Digital Human League. And the reason we called it that, because I was like, I want to call it Digital Human Committee, blah, 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 blah. And we just
I keep leave extraordinary gentlemen whenever you say that, but I don't know what.
I know, right? But so we were talking about it, and I think Lon, who was in our office, like, he was joking. I was like, the Human League was an awesome band in the 80s. And so it's like the Digital Human League. That's where it came up. And I was like, I love the idea that we look like superheroes, right? So that's where it organically grew from. Yep. But everyone embraced it, right? So it's basically artists, researchers, academics, all kinds of people sitting there discussing this stuff about it. And we decided to start a project called the WikiHuman Project. And we have a website called wikihuman.org. And you go up there, and we've got a bunch of posts about this stuff we're doing on WikiHumans. And it's going to continue to grow. And we're actually working closely with the guys at ICT. There's a bunch of the guys on the Digital Human League that are from ICT, and they're providing us that data so that we can do that. It's like, here's what we measured the data, here's what it should come out with, here's what it is. And the goal is that, the goal is as of now, but like I told you, like that's going to change because we never know what's going to happen. But the goal as of now is we're going to get the data set we have from ICT, and we're going to make a first version, which will continue to grow, of a wiki of a human with the shaders we have on there, and say that is your benchmark, and we're going to give that out for free. So that's people can go up there and say, here's the mesh, here's what a diffuse map needs to look like, here's what a single scatter map needs to look like, here's what this, and here's the shader network that needs to happen. So if I'm going to make a human of some kind,
you got the recipe.
I've got the recipe. There's no reason to do that, because the reason that I've found is like everyone has some weird ass recipe, and everyone's like, oh no, it's scientifically acquired, it's physically accurate shaders, but it's all bullshit because no one's actually plugging in the right maps into everything. So it's all kind of all over the place. Like, we can provide a recipe, and if you want to alter that recipe, that's fine, but at least you do something scientific as opposed to randomly just making things redder. There's no. If I made my screen redder, I would look freaky, right? But that's the thing. It's like my approach has always been like, light something correctly by starting with correct lighting or things that you do in nature. So physically accuracy is the way to do it.
That's one thing I liked about Digital Dimension when they were around. Well, they still are around, but in LA, and they did Final Destination 2. Which was...
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
And that was V-Ray. So actually, that was when
one of the first big V-Ray shit.
That's when I met Vlado and those guys. I got Vlado and what's the other guy's name?
Peter.
I think, yeah. They came over like for some event, so we ended up going to dinner with those guys. And James Coulter, one of the guys, was trying to get him to go to a strip club, and those guys were so squeamish about the idea that they were like, no, we don't want to do that. And so it was just funny kind of watching this like thing go down at dinner, because James Coulter was like big on the going to those kind of places, I guess.
Sure.
But so what I loved about the way that they approached it, like Jason Crosby is the VFX soup there, he would approach everything from a real point of view to start with.
Yes.
And that would mean that you would simulate everything as it would be in real life. So he would show this to the director. So Final Destination 2, there's all these bouncing logs on a freeway that are like brutally killing everyone as they bounce down the street. Now, or the freeway. So what he did is he initially would show simulations of these logs, they weigh this amount of weight, they're this size, this material, like friction, this is what you're going to get. And the logs would fall off the truck and they just hit the ground and bounce once, and that's it, like very dull. So the director's like, this is not what I want. And he's like, great, we've established that this is real and this is not what you want, so now we'll go into making it more Hollywood and go from there. And it's good because at least that way like what is real before you go into the whole conversation about, because otherwise you're going to be like, oh, it doesn't look real, and it's like, yeah, well, we've already
established what real is.
And I think it's very important just to kind of have that conversation.
I couldn't agree with that more, and I think that's exactly the way I'm trying to approach the Wiki Even project, because basically, like, that's what my map is supposed to look like. Now, is that accurate? But no, but maybe or not, depending on what your shader is, right? So that's the data that I can get from the scan, right?
Yep.
And so the scan is an important part of your benchmark in terms of establishing where you start from. Don't take a data that you got from something that's scientific where I was like, well, it's not red enough, doesn't look real, and just start messing with it. It's like there's a reason why it has the colors that it has in there, or in the values that it has in there, and that's you need to start with. And if those don't match what you want, instead of just tweaking it, go back to the people who did the scan data and ask them, why is that value that way?
Absolutely.
So what we're going to do is like, here's what that data needs to look like. Here's what this needs to happen, And at the same time, like people like ICT, that's a research institute, they're like, great, now we have something to do. And then when we want to test stuff, we know that at least we've gotten this figured out. Now we can move on to the next thing. So.
I like it because it's kind of like when you go and shoot like HDR or anything like that. Like you go on set, okay, I need to capture, these angles with these stops, all the way through. And that's the process for getting my light to light my shot.
You got to make the best shot out there and make sure it's color accurate.
Yeah, and then from there, later I might add some additional lights, like a few keys to get the extra kicks, whatever else I need. But this is what I need to do. This is my process. This is now standard throughout the industry, and this is how we work. Typically, digital human is going to fall into the spectrum of the creative side, where it's a bit of an unknown. You go and you do it, and
we certainly don't have the answer to why things look uncanny, right? And there's a lot of other things that we're tackling.
But to actually at least have a process is a huge stepping point.
Absolutely, and everyone's like, well, it's like anyone can make a still look good, but then once you move it, it's going to look weird. It's like, yes, absolutely.
That's just another
thing.
Stone to
Here's the thing that I realized from the Uncanny Valley issue, and I worked on Tron. Right now, I didn't actually deal with Clue on Tron, but Clue was an important part of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? So, and Steve and I have talked about it. I actually had Steve on one of my podcasts as well, and we talked about it specifically on that. But we've talked about it for a while. When you do Brad Pitt, you make an old Brad Pitt, no one knows what Brad Pitt looks like old. So
you got nothing to compare it to.
So you don't have anything to compare it to. But when you do a young Jeff Bridges, it's a problem, right? Because you already know what young Jeff Bridges is supposed to look like, et cetera, et cetera. Then you actually have to get old Jeff Bridges to act like young Jeff Bridges, and his face doesn't necessarily move the same way, so there's a bunch of other things. Plus, maybe there's technology problems. You don't even know. What was very interesting to me was my first realization of the Uncanny Valley problem is that you and I have worked in the visual effects industry for a while. Someone does a crappy explosion on the side of the road, right? Whatever. 90% of people wouldn't even think about it, don't even know it's CG. Looks fine. You and I goes like, oh my God, did you see the color of that explosion? The cop was all fucked up and the smoke looked all soft and blah, 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 blah. You and I would see that, right? 90% of people would not know.
Right.
You've got one of the best artists in the world working on a human of Clue, right? Everyone in your grandmother, for some reason, knows that shot is wrong.
Yep.
But no one can tell you why. And they're like, someone will say, oh, it's the eyes. And then it's like the forehead. Oh, no. The way the lips were not. Everyone has a different interpretation of it, but everyone knows it's wrong. So somehow, if a digital human does not respond correctly, that's what creates that visceral response. That's actually something I'm very interested in. Like, why does it create a visceral response? Why emotionally does that happen? And what does it take to break that, you know? And that's why I have people like Angela and Mike Seymour on the group, because I want to understand.
Mm-hmm. That's
and
really cool.
if I can, if let's just forget all the CG and you know, bringing Tupac back from the dead, which was also very interesting. Mm-hmm. But
I'm actually hoping to get one of my friends who was the one who approached Dr. Dre in the first place to get that whole thing to happen. So yeah, because of John Texture and all the other legal stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm trying. I want to try and do an episode on that. I think it'd be kind of fun.
And I've got just the right people to talk to you about it. But the thing that's interesting to me is not just like bringing dead actors back. Is why do we respond the way we do to the Uncanny Valley? Mm-hmm. And if I can understand that and understand what is the appropriate response that we're expecting, then wouldn't it be interesting for us to find out more about humans and about emotions and about what it's important to us for us to see and to understand?
That's right.
And now it's all of a sudden, it's not about CG anymore. It's about humanity and understanding what are the keys that we want to look at and subtleties that we don't even understand that we see or respond to. Yeah. So let's take our digital human and test it on psychological groups and say, does this respond better or worse? And then suddenly we'll understand, you know, what makes sense. As an example, MIT did some research recently where they basically saw that they can enhance video, where they can actually see blood flow moving through your face.
Wow.
And they've done it through standard video, and they can actually see the blood flow happening. And I was looking at it, and the guy, actually the person who introduced me to it, his name is Stephen Parker. He's the guy who worked on Tupac. He was on the lighter on Tupac. And he said, you know what? I bet you, and a little bit of a morbid story, but he used to be in the military, right? So he was in Iraq during the war. And he said, I hate to tell you, but I've seen a dead person, right? And you immediately know that person's dead. There's no question about that, right? And as opposed to a person sleeping or not moving, right? And what is it that's about that person? And his response was, looking at that video where they enhanced the video where you can actually see blood flow moving, he says, I bet you that subconsciously we see blood flow moving through a face. And then if we add that to the digital human, that person would look more alive. And therefore, that's part of the reason that people look at digital humans and say that person looks like a zombie. And that the reason is that they're not necessarily seeing things subconsciously that they don't understand.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah.
So those are things I want to explore as an example.
Yeah, that's pretty mind-blowing, actually. I was in the room with James Cameron, and he's talking about Avatar, how I think it was Fox wouldn't let him, but yeah, like basically wouldn't let him do any movie banners, posters, anything for Avatar because they just felt like still images looked wrong. Like the creatures it didn't look real, it looked really weird, and they would alienate the audience. So if you notice all the marketing, at least initially, it was just all the title and that's it. Mm-hmm. And that was because they felt like the motion is what actually made them look real.
Right?
Yeah. So that I thought was really interesting. And like going on with the age reversal that, you know, Jeff Bridges, you know, when he looks young, it isn't to a CG, but I remember when I worked on Looper, they did the younger Gordon Levitt Jr. imitating Bruce Willis, and it's kind of uncanny how far they kind of took that, and it kind of looked a bit, you know, at times it was kind of like annoying just watching it, but like I got kind of interested in that because they had him imitate him, they used makeup, they tried to make him look like a young Bruce Willis, but the thing is that a lot of us who've watched Bruce Willis know what Bruce Willis looks like young. So Gordon Levitt Jr. looked like a young version of the old Bruce Willis, in my opinion, if that makes sense. Yes. It's basically like Bruce Willis.
Well, I think, you know what he looked like, and I think he did a good job of it. He wasn't actually trying to look like Bruce Willis from Moonlighting. Mm-hmm. He was trying to look like
Bruce Willis now
Bruce Willis's caricature, younger, right? So he was trying to get that, because Bruce Willis from the old young days, you're right. And Bruce Willis from young days was like, yeah, he was kind of goofy and blah blah blah, and then he got a little more.
Yeah, that's exactly my point.
Yeah.
Is it like is a more clean cut younger guy, and like this version of him is essentially the mannerisms and all the things he's picked up over time, and you know the guy that we recognize now as Bruce Willis, who's the shaved head, you know, muscly dude. That's who he is now. And it's just, I always thought it was kind of interesting. It's just it isn't what we're, you know, we're relating to what we expect to see of
Sure.
Bruce Willis young, rather than it being what Bruce Willis would be young, which is quite different because people change in a lot of ways over time. So it's more the interpretation of that, which I thought was interesting. ILM did Terminator 4, like Terminator Salvation, and like I remember a lot of my friends working on that, where there were probably about, I can't remember, like I'm just going to throw out a number, but like 8 shots, let's say, or 12 shots. Let's say 8 shots that were in the movie originally, that they're trying to do like a photoreal Arnold Schwarzenegger. So Arnie gave them the, you know, approval to recreate his likeness for the movie because he wasn't going to be in it. And I had a lot of friends, I asked them, like when they went and saw the movie, what do you think of him? And they're like, oh, why was he CG? And they're only asking because I mentioned it, so they had no idea. The thing was that they struggled so much to try and get that photoreal Arnold Schwarzenegger, and like there were a bunch of shots they didn't make in the movie just because they blatantly just could not get it to be photoreal. I think that Arnold Schwarzenegger, especially back then, is a bit of a safety one to use though, because I always felt in Terminator 1 like Arnie looked plastic just as a human being because he's just this muscly, very robotic moving guy. So you know, but it is kind of interesting seeing them struggle to try and do, like, spend months and months and months trying to create a photoreal moving character, and even one that acts like a Terminator. It's gonna be a bit forgiving, but it's still so hard to pull
That's
off.
why I'm so impressed with, to be honest, with Buttons. And I know people will say it's like, well, you know, there's a lot of things that were forgiving about that, but you know, Buttons, it was. I watched those conversations, and I can easily just go, I wouldn't know that was CG. And at the same time, when I look at Jeff Bridges, there were things that were happening. He was emoting so much, right? He was like, oh yeah, you know, and he was doing things, and you can look at a shot, and it's like, let's say it's a 200 frame shot, right? And you look at it, and like 5 frames are like not quite right, and it ruins the whole shot, you know. But it's so hard to figure out what 5 frames or what it is. So
It's so tricky.
yeah,
There's always tricks that you learn when early in your career, and one was always playing things back at like 3 times the frame rate, and it's such a goofy thing, but like it works because like you play it back 3 times the frame rate, you're able to, even though it looks goofy, you pick up on like, does it look right or does it look wrong?
yep.
And you can
Or the
usually,
other thing is to look at your monitor through a mirror. Have you said that?
yeah. I love that. There's all these old school tricks that I haven't actually heard that one in so long, but like.
But it does work. Animators like something not right, and you look at it through a mirror, it's like, oh. And just literally bring a mirror, like a little hand mirror, into your monitor and look at it through the mirror, and it's just like somehow something's going to come up, and you realize why it's wrong.
I love that. So I mean, and there's what you're doing is like the holy grail, and so I think it's really exciting that you guys are looking to tackle that, and I'd be interested to see how it all goes. But that's awesome, man. I'll be respectful of your time. I'll start to wrap it up, but I guess like going back to Chaos Group, I mean, who are some of your biggest clients?
Our biggest clients, well, we have the thing about Chaos Group that's interesting is that obviously VFX is an important client to us as far as the genre, because it helps drive a lot of technology we're doing, but it's not necessarily the biggest one we do. We have a huge amount of architecture clients, and architecture is a big one. Gentler is probably a very, very big client of ours. They're an architecture. They're the largest architecture firm in the world.
Wow.
I used to work for them before I went to.
I was going to say, it sounds familiar.
Yep. And there's a lot of people in the automotive industry as well. So we have a huge amount of automotive companies as well. We have a lot of product design is also being done in visual effects. Things that we never knew were happening. I think Peter mentioned the fact that he didn't realize that there's some nuclear power plants that are using our software. I had no idea. And he doesn't know what they're doing with them either. Another interesting thing, a very fun client of ours, a very close relationship with them is IKEA. 75% of the IKEA catalog you get today is rendered in V-Ray.
That's great.
Not photography. And there's good reasons why they do that, which is one of the best parts of that presentation. We've actually had them present a couple of times. And one of the reasons they do that, as an example, is they'll present a kitchen, but every market has slightly different requirements to their kitchen. And so
it's like Fruit Loops in Mexico.
it's like Fruit Loops in Mexico. It's perfect. It's Fruit Loops in Mexico, right? Because you want to have different Fruit Loops for Mexico, Japan, Tokyo, or India, whatever, and they all kind of want the same kitchen. But instead of having to tear up the floor and do a new floor for a photography, just do it in CG. And so they go through iterations. That's why they did it, and it goes really, really well. So they're actually a fascinating client to me that we work with. But yeah, so architecture, VFX, commercials, all kinds of stuff. Medical, we did a bunch of medical animations. We have 100,000 legal licenses that are sold out there of Chaos Group. So
that's great.
And that's not render nodes; those are user licenses. So, and it's quite big, and I think it's pretty cool for starting off as two guys out of Bulgaria to do that.
No, it's amazing. Like it blows my mind how big that whole rendering industry has become. Like I used to know. I'm going to say his name wrong, but Marcos Fajardo.
Marcos, yeah.
So I knew him, again, like Gordon Chapman, all those guys, when I was 14. And so...
I remember the early days of Arnold when it was like...
Yeah, it was for Max. It was in the 90s. He was working at Station X Studios.
Pepe Land and that kind of...
Oh, yeah, and Pepe, all those guys. That's what I love is like I was kind of lucky to be on like IRC, like internet chat, back in like the mid-90s, and like we're all this group of people using Max, and there are so many guys like doing amazing stuff that like they're at the top of their career now and doing great stuff. And yeah, it's just kind of cool. Like for me to be like 14, hanging out on IRC like 24 hours a day with these guys and all bouncing ideas around, doing a lot of stuff. And like each of us are showing like, hey, I figured out how to do this, or I'm going to try and do this. And it's really cool. So, God, drawing a blank. Who the hell were we talking about a second ago?
Vlado? No.
Shit. Sorry.
It's okay.
Who was it?
Marcus?
Oh, yeah. Fuck. Duh.
Yeah.
Sorry. You can tell I haven't had much sleep.
Okay.
So Marcos, he was developing Arnold at the time.
Yeah.
This is going to be a Max renderer.
Yep.
He was working on...
I work with... Interestingly, when I went to Sony, when I was at Sony and working on Ghost Rider, he was an employee of Sony, and that's when they bought Arnold from him, and then you see what he was developing it there. So I was hanging out with Marcos for a while. He's a super nice guy. I really like Marcos.
That was actually the first time.
And his, I think it's his wife. I'm sure. I don't know if they're married or not, so, or if there's, but she was a compositor on Ghost Rider.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So I was working with her, and she's super nice too. So yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't actually. That was the first time I'd actually heard of Arnold since like the 90s. Was I think it's Cinefex or something I read about Ghost Rider, and they mentioned like Arnold.
We didn't use Arnold on Ghost Rider though.
They were developing it around that time.
They were developing.
Because it was Katana and Arnold.
So the first show that I know of at Sony that was using it was Monster House.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, you're right. Actually, it was probably one of my friends, like Willie Hammis, I think, because he was lead lighter on that, and like he was mentioning, Arnold
and to people at Sony at the time, because they were so ingrained into that render man mentality, it was the hardest transition for them. So they'd actually looked at me at some point. They wanted me to go on to an Arnold show because I had a ray trace rendering experience. Right. It was enough for them to like, I don't understand this, and then I think my quote after leaving Ghost Rider was a RenderMan show, and my quote on that show is like, if I never have to render a shadow map again, I'm happy, because I just never want to do that again.
I'll tell you a great quote. Because Ghost Rider, I remember they used Maya and a lot of custom tools they developed for Maya's fluids to do all the fire. And that was something I'd read about, and I was reading extensively about fluids and fire, because I was about to go do Daybreakers, which was like the first vampire movie to ever do like fluids for all the vampire ashing stuff. And
Is that Day Watch? No.
oh no, Daybreakers, which
Daybreakers,
is
okay.
Ethan Hawke, Willem Dafoe.
Oh, yeah.
So I was hanging out with the directors of the movie, the Spirig brothers, and yeah, I remember like we were talking about the fire. We were looking at a shot of like Willem Dafoe's face on fire, and they were talking about Ghost Rider, and they were like, yeah, we didn't really like the fire in it, blah blah blah, and like I was like, well, they spent like a year and a half, I think it was, a year and a half developing all the technology for that, whereas we've had like 2 weeks or whatever to look at doing our stuff. And I just remember the brothers were like, a year and a half, like I wish they spent a year and a half writing the fucking script.
Right.
Because I never saw the film. I went to the theaters. I had flown back from LA. All my friends were still at work, so no beers until they could get out of work. So I'm like, fuck it, I'll go see Ghost Rider. It's probably the only movie I've ever walked out of about halfway through, just because I could not stand the acting, everything about it. So
It's terrible.
paycheck.
It's paycheck. But you know what was nice? Is Kevin Mack was such a nice guy, and he had a great sense of humor about it. He was like, it was fine. And
Visually, I'm sure it looked great.
well, here's the last. We were. It was an easy show, like I said, paycheck, right? And really well run. So they basically told us this is how well Sony was running as a machine at the time. They told us in November, it's like, based on our projections, sometime in March, we may have to move from 8-hour days to 10-hour days. We just want to make sure you're aware of that. And this is like 4 months ahead of time. They already knew that we're going to have a little bit of overtime in that time. So that's how well it was run. But anyway, at the end of the show, I had one last big shot that they gave me, which was the first transformation shot of his motorcycle, where the first time that he puts it and transforms it, and it was going to be like 1,000 frame big transformation shot, right? And the way they were doing in RenderMan is like they didn't do true reflection or true ray trace reflection. They did reflection occlusion for everything, which looks okay for the most part, but this pinnacle shiny bike had to transform, and it didn't quite look right. So they decided, well, we're going to do 2 reflection bounces in RenderMan at the time. 2 reflection bounces, and it looked way better. But it was going to take forever to render, right? And so they said, all right. And it's like, this is my last shot of the show, and I had like 2 weeks to do it. And so I gave him a couple of keyframes. It's like, it looks great. And I was like, all right. So what are we going to do? It's like, I'll tell you what, it's going to take forever to render. Just put it on the farm, and it was going to take, they gave me enough CPUs, or it was going to take 1 week to render. 1 week. And I had nothing to do in 1 week. So my job during that 1 week is to look as many alternate methods to get it to render faster. And if I couldn't, it doesn't matter. It'll just be done in a week.
Right. Yeah. You're babysitting your render.
Babysitting my render for 7 days. So I went.
Would you be really pissed if you realized
it was my last shot? I didn't really care.
Would you be pissed if like you're like, oh shit, I used the wrong camera?
No. Yeah. Oh, that would have been. Yeah. Luckily, no. Because I had a week, I could double check all that stuff.
Shit, one of the wheels was hidden.
At one point, I think I spent like 3 days, like, can we get it done in Mental Ray, or do we have enough Mental Ray licenses, or whatever it was.
Mental Ray is just as slow though.
Whatever it was,
yeah.
Just like testing different methods, and it was like, and I was like, and then finally it's like, nah, just let it go. They literally told me just let it go, and I was like, what am I gonna do? So I walked to the movies, I watched a couple of movies, and I had it done, and then eventually it was done. They were very happy with it, and the shot looked great from the screening room. Never actually saw it in the theater, but anyway, it was fun.
That's awesome, man. Well, I'll just ask 1 or 2 more questions. I guess like there's 1,000 things I wanted to ask you, but just as more of a key takeaway for artists. I mean, if there's a lot of like rendering lighting artists who want to go out there and get work or freelance, like, what do you think are like 3 core qualities that you need to have that will make you, who you are as a good lighting artist?
Well, my thing is, I'd say study practical things as much as possible, and that's not a hard thing to do. The key is to actually just get a camera and do it, because your job as a lighter, or your job as anyone doing any kind of rendering, is the same job as you're doing as a photographer of any kind. So it's to pick up a camera and study that. And being a lighter is not necessarily always about getting your shaders right and your lighting right as well. The biggest thing that you have to do, especially if you're doing stills or anything on your own, is composition. And study the art of composition. It's a big and important thing to do, and so go ahead and do that. Instead of picking up books on how to do great CG, or looking on the internet, which is always good. It's always good to have that stuff, but just to have in your back pocket, go to a bookstore or go to anywhere and pick up a book on cinematography. Understand the art of cinematography, because lighting, that's what you're doing, is you're a cinematographer. So understand that process. You'll be surprised. And also look at once you've understood those movies, understood those books and looked at them, they're going to give a bunch of examples of movies that have really great cinematography in them.
Right.
And look at those. And they may not have CG, but you're going to understand. It's like, that's why Citizen Kane is so important. It's an important movie to understand because of this part of the cinematography, and those are really good things to do. I like one of my favorite, what I used to do, I used to teach classes at Rice University when I was in architecture, and I would make people watch movies to understand good composition of stuff. And one of the movies I made them watch, which is an embarrassing movie, but amazing cinematography, is the movie called Legend with Tom Cruise from way back when.
Yep.
And the
light for downstairs, maybe watch that.
And the lighting on that is so freaking good, and the way they compose it. And yes, they backlight all the bad guys in the perfect way. They warm up all the lights in the right way, and they cool off all the lights in the right way. Just look at those lightings and study that. That's good studying from that. And you're not always going to learn good lighting by looking at other people that are the same level of you.
Yeah.
Look at lighting that was done 50, 60, 100 years ago, and those people figured things out that were important, and that's what's important, I think, to me. So
that's
study good lighting.
That's awesome, man. That's really great advice. And obviously, looking at real books, especially cinematography, I've actually got a few downstairs, which I might dig up the names of, because for me, at least when I was in my earlier days, there wasn't that much info out there in 3D, so I just nerd out on film stuff, because essentially that's what you're trying to recreate. So, but is there any online resources you'd recommend for people who are lighting artists or want to do photoreal stuff, or just in general for V-Ray as well?
Well, I'd say just reach out to the community that's out there, and then keep growing from there. Go to forums that are important to you. I think, obviously, in terms of V-Ray, if you want to learn about V-Ray, like the V-Ray forum itself is actually a really good resource. It's a good one to start with. But a lot of great websites out there. Obviously, CG Society and stuff like that are fun. The FX Guide is a great resource as well. And then anyone else that has some great advice. I mean, I think your podcast, as an example, is a fantastic way to get into it. And I love the idea that it's coming from the podcast form, because I think that's something that's very easy to digest in a way. A lot of people have a hard time, if you're working, right? You can't just stop what you're doing and just read a website. That's right. But if you're working, especially let's say you're modeling or lighting, if you just put your headphones on and you can hear advice,
while you're working
away, it's really great. And so podcasts form a really good thing. And like you and I have been doing all night, we're having a conversation. Yep. And people can hear that conversation and engage in that. So
that was my next question, was about your podcast, because you've got your one, which you started around the same time as I did.
Yeah.
So do you want to give a bit of an overview of that? Obviously, I'll leave show notes and everything else too. But
Sure. Well, we part of our office, the Culver City office for Chaos Group in LA is we made it kind of look like a garage. We have a lot of garage themed things in there, so we called it the CG Garage, and CG stands for computer generated images, but it also stands for Chaos Group. So it works really well. So we're calling it the CG Garage podcast. And the only thing that makes it different from your podcast, because it's actually a lot of similarities, is that we've approached it from the idea of hanging out with our buddies and trying to be very much more relaxed and chill and a little bit goofy in that way, but also an inspirational. And what you've been doing on your podcast, which I've also really admired, is you're trying to
bring
inspire.
my enemies on.
Well, no, you're trying to really inspire people to sort of look things in terms of their career or where to get to the next level and doing that. So, but you're doing it in the same way that I'm doing it. So there's actually a lot of similarities between our podcasts, which I think is great. And I'd love to be able to bring you onto my podcast. So at one point, you guys should come to CG Garage and check out what we're doing there. So, then you'll come on that.
I'll post some links on there because I love the idea and the fact that you do have access to so many interesting people, and the people you've interviewed already are like really awesome. And, I think it's just, you don't typically have access to this type of stuff out there. It's, you might read interviews or whatever, but it's not typically getting to hear more the insights of it. And like, we were talking earlier about it. And like, for me with this, like, I want to do it more as like a fly on the wall with a lot of interviews. Cause you be at lunch or whatever shooting shit with your buddies, and the amount of stuff like, oh yeah, and day after tomorrow we did this thing, and on this project on Tron, the amount of stuff that comes up is just so amazing. So
yeah,
I thought it'd be great to kind of,
and you're the only person that heard that, right? So that's the problem.
Yeah. So and for me, like, I've been on panels plenty of times where it'd be like me, Zap Anderson, Neil Blevins, like all shooting the shit on stage, and like everyone's like frantically writing stuff down. I'm even writing stuff down. It's just, you get a bunch of guys together who do this and have been doing it for, a very long time. Let them nerd out, and the amount of knowledge and information that comes up is awesome. So I love the idea behind it. So
yeah, I mean, this one of my favorite stories on my podcast is when I talked to Steve Preeg, who I've known for years, right? I worked with him on iRobot, et cetera, and we're just chatting, and I decided to just interview him about stuff, and then talking about his history, and find out that one of the first CG things he did was to work on the O.J. Simpson trial. He actually did like an animated O.J. Simpson for some like thing for the defense or whatever it was. I was like, really? I was like, yeah. And I was like, I never knew that. So these conversations, even with people come up all the time. So that's why I love it. At the same time, it's like, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to talk to this guy about the same old stories I talked about. Like, things come up that you never knew were going to come up.
Yeah, that's the other thing I love is like, it actually gives me a chance to learn a lot about my friends that I didn't know before.
Yeah.
And because usually we'll talk about stuff that isn't work related, and I'm like, holy crap, I didn't know you worked on that. Or it's great. Like, I think it's a really good exercise to do, and it's really insightful as well. Cool. That's awesome, man. Thanks so much. And if anyone wanted to find out more information about you, where would they go?
Well, in terms of what I'm doing in labs, you just go to labs.chaosgroup.com, and we've set that page up for a bunch of, it's basically just like a blog. If you have any interest in doing some of the stuff that we're participating in, you can just email us, and it's labs@chaosgroup.com, and just email us there, and then we can get some information. We also have a Twitter that you can participate in, and that's at CG_labs. So there you go. And that answers pretty much all the places you can communicate with us.
Cool. And your podcast? My
podcast is CG Garage, and you can get that on iTunes, etc.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's also right there on the Labs website as well. You can just go there and check it out.
That's great, man. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. I had a blast talking to Chris. Thank you again, Chris. You can check out his podcast. I recommend you do. Really, really cool stuff. He's got to interview a lot of cool guys and gives a lot of insight. I love his approach to it. It's very organic and a lot more, something that you can put your headphones on and chill out to while you work and get a lot of insight into the industry, as well as into a lot of individual artists. So I really dig that. That is it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to myself and Chris shoot the shit. Like I said, leave a comment. I'd love if you can go to iTunes, leave a review, or else leave a comment on the blog just to let me know what you thought of this episode. And like I said, if you're interested in episodes like this, I mean, Chris is an artist, but at the same time, giving a lot of insight into the software. This is something that I'd love to see what you guys think, because obviously I did one with Eddie Perlberg from Autodesk recently as well. And if this is something that really is something you guys dig, then I can definitely bring on a lot more people tied to the developing side of feature films and software as well. So let me know. Either way, I've got another episode which is going to be super cool. Like I said, I'll be leaving it as a surprise, but it'll be coming up in a few days, Monday. So that is it. To check out the show notes and to leave a comment, go to alanmckay.com/28 for episode 28. And the website is allanmckay.com. Cool. And you can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, all that good stuff. I'm catching up on everything this weekend after being bombarded from the Paris talk and a few other things I've been doing. Really cool. Finally, I'm going to be launching the mentorship program again. This will be the second time I've ever run it. We're currently doing the first batch throughout the year, but I'll be doing an 8-month mentorship program. That's going to be coming up soon. Pretty much what I'll be focusing on for the next month is gearing up for that. So I will be posting more information about that very shortly, so keep an eye out for it. And finally, I will be posting more information. My VIP list, if you want to go there, you can go to alanmckay.com/inside to get on the inside VIP list. I've already been posting a lot of really cool content, from email scripts to actual case studies on how to get promoted, how to get, more recognition in your workplace, position yourself as an authority, branding, lots of cool stuff. I'm going to be posting more stuff in the coming days too. So this is all exclusive to that list and not publicly available outside of that. So if you want to check it out, alanmckay.com/inside. Next episode, as usual, will be Monday. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.